school bus driver became concerned when a 9-year-old boy refused to get off at his stop. What the boy whispered about his new stepmother made him drive straight to the police. Ray Donovan eased the large yellow school bus to a stop at the intersection of Maple and Elm, where the crossing guard, Mrs. Winters, held up her sign with arthritic hands that had been directing traffic for longer than Ray had been driving these routes. Through the wide rearview mirror mounted above his head, Ray scanned the faces of his passengers, 23 elementary school children in various states of morning drowsiness or excitement. "Morning, Evelyn," Ray called out to Mrs. Winters, who gave him a two-fingered salute before waving the bus through. At 52, Raymond Joseph Donovan cut an imposing figure despite the 15 years that had passed since his retirement from the Marines. His broad shoulders still filled out his blue uniform shirt, and his military short gray hair remained a testament to habits formed during his service. But the creases around his eyes had softened over the years of watching children grow up through his rearview mirror, and his once booming voice had gentled to match the needs of his young passengers. Bus number 17 had been Ray's domain for nearly 15 years now, ever since he'd returned to his hometown of Oak Ridge, Connecticut. The mid-sized suburban town sat just far enough from Hartford to maintain its small-town feel while still benefiting from proximity to the city. Ray knew every pothole, every seasonal change in the landscape, and most importantly, every child who stepped on and off his bus. "Hey, Mr. Ray," called out a freckled girl bouncing in her seat near the front. "Did you see the rocket I made? It's for the science fair Friday." "I sure did, Amelia. Looks like NASA might be calling you soon," Ray replied, smiling at the third grader's enthusiasm. Amelia Perkins had been bringing her creations to show him every morning this week. Her father was deployed overseas, and Ray made sure to give her those extra moments of attention. The bus rumbled forward, past neatly trimmed lawns and colonial-style homes with American flags and spring wreaths adorning front doors. Oak Ridge Elementary came into view, a red brick building with wide windows and a playground that had been recently updated thanks to community fundraising efforts Ray and his wife, Linda, had helped organize last year. As the children filed off the bus with their oversized backpacks and lunch boxes, Ray nodded to each one, calling many by name and wishing them a good day. He'd learned long ago that for some kids, his greeting might be the only positive adult interaction they'd have that morning. It wasn't part of his official job description, but it was perhaps the most important part of his role. With the elementary school route completed, Ray guided the bus toward Oak Ridge Middle School, where the older students waited. The middle schoolers were a different breed, more self-conscious, less exuberant, navigating the awkward terrain between childhood and adolescence. Ray adjusted his approach accordingly, offering a more subdued nod or a simple morning that acknowledged their growing sense of independence without embarrassing them in front of peers. It was during the afternoon routes when Ray had first noticed the change in Clay Miller. Clay had been riding Ray's bus since kindergarten, always sitting in the third row on the right side, always with a book or handheld game, and always with a cheerful "See you tomorrow, Mr. Ray," when he bounded off at the corner of Willow Drive and Oak Street. The boy had his mother's dark curly hair and his father's lanky build, growing tall early like many of the Miller men in town. But after spring break, something had shifted. It happened around the same time that Oak Ridge had been buzzing with gossip about Mark Miller's quick remarriage, just 3 months after the tragic accident that had claimed his wife's life. Ray remembered the funeral well. The entire town had turned out for Elena Miller, a beloved second-grade teacher at the elementary school. The snowy January day had seemed fitting for the somber occasion, with the community rallying around Mark and Clay, bringing casseroles and offering childcare. By April, Mark had married Vanessa Chambers, a polished real estate agent who'd recently moved to Oak Ridge from somewhere out west, Phoenix or Tucson. Ray couldn't recall which. The wedding had been small and private, raising eyebrows among the townspeople who found the timeline disrespectful to Elena's memory. But Ray had always been careful not to judge. Grief did strange things to people, and perhaps Mark was just trying to provide stability for Clay. Now, however, as Ray navigated the afternoon route in early May, he couldn't help but notice that Clay had changed. The boy who once couldn't wait to get home now seemed to drag his feet when his stop approached. His animated chatter about books and video games had been replaced with silence. And despite the warming spring weather, Clay had taken to wearing long-sleeved shirts and hoodies, often pulling the sleeves down over his hands. Ray pulled the bus to a stop at the corner of Willow and Oak, opening the hydraulic doors with a soft hiss. "Your stop, Clay," he said gently when the boy remained seated, staring out the window at his house visible halfway down the block. A tidy Cape Cod with navy blue shutters and a freshly painted white picket fence. The Miller house had always seemed like something out of a storybook, especially when Elena had maintained her colorful flower gardens along the walkway. Ray noticed the flower beds were now empty, replaced with uniform boxwood shrubs that matched several other homes that Vanessa's real estate company had recently sold in the neighborhood. Clay looked up, blinking as if coming out of a daydream. "Oh, thanks, Mr. Ray." His voice was so quiet Ray had to strain to hear it over the idle of the engine. Ray watched through the large side mirror as Clay trudged up the street, shoulders hunched beneath his backpack. None of the eagerness he'd once displayed to get home and tell his mom about his day. The boy paused at the mailbox, seeming to gather himself before walking up the path to the front door, which opened before he reached it. Vanessa Miller stood in the doorway, her posture perfect, blonde hair falling in a smooth sheet to her shoulders. Even from this distance, Ray could see her lips were moving, likely asking why Clay was dawdling. There was no hug, no warm welcome home, just a quick ushering inside before the door closed firmly behind them. Something about the scene made the hair on the back of Ray's neck stand up, a sensation he hadn't felt since his last deployment. It was the feeling that something wasn't right, that danger might be lurking where others saw nothing amiss. "You coming, Mr. Ray?" called Mia Jefferson from the back of the bus, snapping Ray out of his thoughts. "Yes, sorry about that," Ray replied, closing the doors and putting the bus in gear. But as he drove away, the image of Clay's reluctant walk up that path stayed with him. By the time Ray pulled into the bus depot at the edge of town, the spring sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the rows of yellow buses. He completed his post-route checklist, checking under each seat for forgotten items and ensuring all windows were closed. In the third row on the right side, he found a small notebook wedged between the seat and the wall. The front cover had Clay Miller's name written in careful block letters, with "private" underlined twice beneath it. Ray hesitated, torn between respecting the boy's privacy and his growing concern. He tucked the notebook into his jacket pocket, deciding he would return it directly to Clay tomorrow morning, and perhaps use the opportunity to check in with him. The depot was quiet, most of the other drivers having finished their routes and headed home. Ray nodded to Gus, the mechanic who perpetually smelled of motor oil and cigarettes, and made his way to his truck, a well-maintained Ford F-150 that had seen better days but, like its owner, was reliable and sturdy. The drive to his house on the outskirts of Oak Ridge took only 15 minutes, but it gave Ray time to process his day. The radio played softly in the background, a local station reporting community news. When the announcer mentioned an upcoming fundraiser for the children's ward at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, Ray made a mental note to tell Linda about it. His wife of 27 years had been a pediatric nurse at Memorial for most of her career and was always looking for ways to improve the experience for her young patients. Ray pulled into the driveway of the modest ranch-style home he and Linda had purchased when they first married. The flower beds along the front were beginning to bloom with the perennials Linda planted years ago. Daffodils, tulips, and hyacinths adding splashes of color against the light gray siding. Through the front window, he could see movement in the kitchen and smiled, knowing Linda was already home and likely preparing dinner. The familiar smell of garlic and tomato sauce greeted him as he stepped inside, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. "That you, Ray?" Linda called from the kitchen, her voice warm and familiar. "No, it's a burglar who happens to have a key," he replied with the same joke he'd been making for years. Linda appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her dark hair now streaked with silver pulled back in a practical ponytail. At 50, she still had the same warm brown eyes that had caught his attention at a community dance decades ago. "How very considerate of you to announce yourself," she said, rolling her eyes but smiling as she crossed to give him a quick kiss. "Dinner's almost ready. Lasagna's in the oven." "Smells wonderful," Ray said, following her back to the kitchen where a salad was already prepared on the counter. This was their routine, comfortable and practiced after nearly 3 decades together. "How was your day?" Linda sighed, moving to check the bubbling dish in the oven. "Busy. We had a 7-year-old come in with a broken arm from falling off the monkey bars. Poor thing. And the Daniels baby was back with another ear infection." She straightened up, giving him a searching look. "You look troubled. What's on your mind?" Ray had long ago given up being surprised by his wife's perceptiveness. Linda could read his mood better than anyone, a skill that had smoothed the rough edges of his transition from military to civilian life years ago. "It's probably nothing," he began, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't nothing. He pulled out a chair at their small kitchen table and sat down. "You know Clay Miller? Elena's boy?" Linda's expression softened with sympathy. "Of course. Such a sweet child. How is he doing? That whole situation with Mark remarrying so quickly." She trailed off, shaking her head slightly. "That's just it. I'm not sure he's doing well." Ray explained what he'd observed over the past few weeks. Clay's withdrawal, the long sleeves, the reluctance to go home. "Today I found this," he said, taking the notebook from his pocket and setting it on the table. "I'm going to give it back to him tomorrow, but I'm concerned." Linda sat across from him, her nursing instincts visibly kicking in. "Have you noticed any other signs? Physical symptoms beyond the clothing choices?" Ray thought carefully. "He's lost weight. Not drastically, but enough that I've noticed. And he seems tired, with dark circles under his eyes." He hesitated before adding, "Last week, when he was getting on the bus, his sleeve rode up and I thought I saw a bruise on his wrist. At the time, I figured it was just from playing, but now I'm not so sure." Linda's face grew serious. "Those could be warning signs. Children grieve differently than adults. But if those symptoms appeared after the father remarried rather than right after Elena's death." She didn't need to finish the thought. "I know Mark from the community center basketball league," Ray said. "He's always seemed like a good father, but he's been working longer hours lately. I've seen his car in the insurance office parking lot late into the evening. And there's something about the new wife that doesn't sit right with me." "Trust your instincts, Ray," Linda said firmly. "You've always had good ones when it comes to the kids on your route. Remember that situation with the Thompson girl a few years back?" Ray nodded. He'd noticed bruises on Amy Thompson's arms and alerted the school counselor, which eventually led to the discovery that Amy's teenage brother had been physically bullying her. The intervention had helped both siblings get the support they needed. "Maybe I should talk to Mike about it," Ray suggested, referring to Linda's brother, Detective Mike Callahan with the Oak Ridge Police Department, "just to get his perspective." "That's not a bad idea," Linda agreed, standing to take the lasagna out of the oven. The rich aroma filled the kitchen as she set the dish on a trivet on the table. "But first, return Clay's notebook tomorrow and see if you can get him to open up a bit. He might just need someone to talk to." As they sat down to dinner, Ray found his thoughts repeatedly returning to Clay. The boy had already lost his mother. The thought that he might be suffering in other ways as well didn't sit right. Ray had seen too much during his time in the service to ignore warning signs, and every protective instinct he'd developed, first as a Marine, then as a father to their now-grown daughter, and finally as the guardian of all the children who rode his bus, told him something was wrong at the Miller house. The notebook sat on the table between them, its presence a reminder of the responsibility Ray felt toward all his kids, as he called them. Tomorrow, he decided, he would make a point of paying closer attention to Clay Miller. As Ray prepared for bed that night, the day's concerns still weighed on him. Linda was already under the covers, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a medical journal. Ray went through his nightly routine, checking the locks, adjusting the thermostat, making sure his uniform was ready for tomorrow. "You're still thinking about Clay, aren't you?" Linda asked without looking up from her reading. Ray sighed as he slid into bed beside her. "Can't help it. Something just feels off." Linda set her journal aside and removed her glasses. "You know, I was thinking, Elena used to bring Clay to the hospital sometimes when she volunteered in the children's ward. He'd help pass out books and toys to the kids. Such a compassionate little boy. She paused, her expression troubled. I haven't seen him at the hospital since she died, which is understandable. But when I ran into Mark at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago, he seemed distant, not like himself. Grief changes people, Ray acknowledged, but something about this seems different. He reached over to turn off his bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the soft glow from Linda's lamp. I'll start by returning his notebook tomorrow. See where that leads. Just be careful, Linda cautioned. If there is something wrong, you don't want to make it worse by alerting the wrong person. Ray understood what she wasn't saying directly. If Clay was being mistreated at home, confronting the potential abuser could escalate the situation. It was a delicate balance of intervention and caution. I'll tread lightly, he promised, settling back against his pillow as Linda turned off her lamp. But as he drifted toward sleep, Ray couldn't shake the image of Clay's slumped shoulders as he walked up the path to his home, or the way Vanessa had stood in the doorway, her posture rigid and unwelcoming. In 15 years of driving children to and from school, Ray had developed a sixth sense for which kids were hurting. He'd seen the effects of divorce, poverty, peer bullying, and family strife reflected in young faces and behaviors. Clay Miller's silent suffering seemed different somehow, triggering a protective instinct in Ray that wouldn't let him simply look the other way. Tomorrow, he decided as sleep finally claimed him, would be the day he would find a way to reach out to the boy who once couldn't stop talking but now barely spoke at all. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Oak Ridge Elementary as Ray made his way through the front office, Clay's notebook tucked securely under his arm. He'd arrived 20 minutes before his route began, specifically to find the boy before classes started. "Morning, Ray," called Doris Fleming, the school secretary who'd been manning the front desk since Ray's own daughter had attended Oak Ridge Elementary. Her gray hair was arranged in its perpetual bun, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. "You're early today." "Morning, Doris," Ray replied with a nod. "I found something on the bus that belongs to one of my kids. Thought I'd return it before school starts. Is Clay Miller here yet?" Doris consulted the oversized wall clock. "The before-school program is in the cafeteria. He might be there. His stepmother's been dropping him off early lately." Something in her tone suggested she had opinions about Vanessa Miller, but professional discretion kept her from voicing them. "Thanks," Ray said, turning toward the cafeteria. Then, on impulse, he asked, "Doris, have you noticed anything different about Clay recently? Since his dad remarried?" The secretary's lips thinned, and she glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Between us? Yes. That child used to bubble over with stories and questions. Now he hardly says good morning." She leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Parker, his teacher, she's concerned too, mentioned that his grades have slipped, and he's not turning in homework like he used to." Ray nodded, filing this information away. "Thanks, Doris. I appreciate it." The cafeteria was buzzing with early morning energy. About 30 children scattered at the long tables under the supervision of 2 teachers' aides. Some kids were finishing breakfast, others working on homework, and a small group in the corner was engaged in a card game. Ray scanned the room until he spotted Clay sitting alone at the end of a table, hunched over what appeared to be a worksheet, his dark curls falling across his forehead. Ray approached slowly, not wanting to startle the boy. "Morning, Clay," he said, keeping his voice gentle. Clay's head jerked up, his large brown eyes momentarily wide with something that looked like fear before recognition set in. "Oh, hi, Mr. Ray. I found something on the bus yesterday that I think belongs to you," Ray said, holding out the notebook. The look of relief that washed over Clay's face was palpable. "My journal," he breathed, reaching for it with both hands. "Thank you. I thought I lost it." Ray noticed how Clay quickly tucked the notebook into his backpack, zipping the compartment closed with deliberate care. "Must be important to you," Ray observed casually, taking a seat on the bench across from him. Clay nodded without making eye contact. "My mom gave it to me before." He didn't finish the sentence. "I understand," Ray said quietly. "It's good to have things that remind us of the people we love, even when they're not here anymore. This earned him a quick glance from Clay, who seemed to be assessing whether Ray truly understood. Whatever he saw in the bus driver's face must have reassured him, because some of the tension left his shoulders. "Sometimes I write to her," Clay confided in a near whisper. "Like letters, you know? About my day and stuff." Ray nodded, his heart aching for this boy who'd found his own way to maintain a connection with his mother. "That sounds like a good thing to do. I bet she'd like that." A bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until the start of classes. Children began gathering their things, the volume in the cafeteria rising as they called to friends and stuffed papers into backpacks. "I should go," Clay said, standing up and wincing slightly as he shouldered his backpack. Ray didn't miss the grimace. "You okay there? That backpack looks heavy." "I'm fine," Clay replied too quickly, his right hand automatically moving to his left shoulder before dropping back to his side. "Just stayed up late reading." It was a plausible explanation, but the defensive note in Clay's voice raised Ray's suspicions further. "Well, I'll see you after school then," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Bus number 17, same as always." Clay nodded and turned to go, but Ray gently called him back. "Clay, you know you can talk to me if something's bothering you, right? About anything." The boy stood frozen for a moment, his back to Ray, and for a second, it seemed like he might turn around and say something. But then another child called Clay's name from across the room, and the moment passed. Clay gave a small nod without turning and hurried away, blending into the stream of students heading to their classrooms. Ray remained seated for a moment, mulling over the interaction. The relief on Clay's face when he saw the notebook, the protective way he'd stored it, the wince of pain, the automatic deflection. All of it strengthened Ray's suspicion that something wasn't right. As he headed back through the hallway toward the parking lot where his bus waited, he spotted a woman with shoulder-length blonde hair speaking with Principal Harrington outside the main office. Vanessa Miller was dressed impeccably in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, her makeup flawless, not a hair out of place. Ray had seen her around town but had never spoken to her directly. "Just want to make sure we're on the same page regarding Clay's academic performance," she was saying to the principal, her voice carrying a clipped, businesslike tone. "His father and I have high expectations." Principal Harrington, a mild-mannered man nearing retirement, nodded politely. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. As I mentioned, there has been some adjustment period following the loss of his mother, which is entirely normal." "It's been 4 months," Vanessa interrupted, her smile not reaching her eyes. "That's more than enough time for a child to adapt, especially with a stable home environment, which Mark and I are providing. His grades need to improve. Perhaps there's a tutor you can recommend." Ray slowed his pace as he passed, nodding a greeting to the principal, who looked somewhat relieved at the interruption. "Morning, Principal Harrington." "Ah, Mr. Donovan, good morning," Harrington replied. "Mrs. Miller, have you met Raymond Donovan? He drives Clay's bus route." Vanessa turned, giving Ray an appraising look. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes were cool and calculating. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "Vanessa Miller." She didn't extend her hand. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," Ray said with the politeness ingrained in him from his military days. "Clay's a great kid. One of the most thoughtful on my route." Something flickered briefly across Vanessa's perfectly composed features. "Yes, well, thoughtfulness doesn't earn scholarship opportunities, does it? We're focused on academic excellence in our household." She turned back to the principal. "Please email me those tutor recommendations, Principal Harrington. I need to get to the office." With that, she strode toward the exit, heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Principal Harrington sighed once she was out of earshot. "She's been in twice this week already. Quite focused on Clay's performance." Ray chose his words carefully. "Clay seems different lately, quieter. Is he doing okay in school?" The principal hesitated, professional discretion warring with genuine concern. "Between us, Ray, Ms. Parker has some concerns. Clay was one of our brightest, most engaged students. Now he's withdrawn, sometimes falls asleep in class. She's tried reaching out to Mr. Miller, but he glanced in the direction Vanessa had gone. Well, most communication goes through Mrs. Miller these days. Ray nodded, filing this information away with the growing collection of concerning observations. Thanks for letting me know. I'll keep an eye on him on the bus. As he walked to the parking lot, Ray pulled out his phone and scrolled to his brother-in-law's number. After a moment's hesitation, he pressed call. Mike Callahan answered on the third ring, the sounds of the police station audible in the background. Callahan. Mike, it's Ray. Got a minute? For you? Always. What's up? Despite the jovial tone, there was an undercurrent of concern. Ray rarely called during working hours. I've got a situation I'd like your perspective on. One of my kids on the bus route. I'm worried about his home situation. Mike's voice immediately shifted to professional mode. What are we talking about here, Ray? I'm not entirely sure yet, Ray admitted, reaching his bus and climbing aboard. But there are enough warning signs that I'm concerned. Could I stop by the station later? After my morning routes? Sure thing. I'll be here until 3. This about the Miller kid. Ray wasn't surprised. In a town the size of Oak Ridge, news traveled fast, and as a detective, Mike kept his ear to the ground. Yeah. You heard something? Nothing specific. Just noticed Mark hasn't been around for the pickup basketball games lately, and there was some talk about the new wife being particular. Nothing actionable, mind you. All right, I'll see you around 11, then. As Ray hung up and prepared to start his route, he couldn't shake the image of Clay's grimace of pain or the way Vanessa Miller had dismissed the boy's emotional needs so casually. For months might seem like enough time to adapt to someone like Vanessa, but Ray knew better. Grief wasn't something you simply moved past on a convenient timetable, especially for a child who'd lost his mother. Oak Ridge Police Station occupied a sturdy brick building on Main Street, its front steps worn from decades of foot traffic. Though the town's crime rate was relatively low, the department stayed busy with everything from traffic violations to domestic disputes, with occasional drug-related issues stemming from the larger cities nearby. Ray entered through the front doors at precisely 11 o'clock, nodding to the desk sergeant, a former classmate from Oak Ridge High. Morning, Pete. Mike expecting me. Go on back, Ray. You know the way. The detective division consisted of a large open room divided by shoulder-height partitions. Mike Callahan's desk was in the far corner, covered with stacks of manila folders and surrounded by family photos, including one prominent shot of him with Ray and Linda from last Christmas. At 46, Mike was 6 years younger than his sister, with the same warm brown eyes as Linda but a stockier build that came from too many hours at his desk and not enough at the gym. His dark hair was beginning to recede, and his shirt strained slightly at the buttons, prompting regular good-natured nagging from Linda about his diet. He looked up as Ray approached, closing the folder he'd been reviewing. Right on time, as always. Marine habits die hard. Huh. Ray smiled slightly as he took the visitor's chair beside Mike's desk. Some habits are worth keeping. Mike leaned back, his expression turning serious. So, tell me about this Miller kid. What's got you worried? Over the next 15 minutes, Ray detailed everything he'd observed. Clay's personality change, the long sleeves despite warm weather, the possible bruise, the weight loss, the wince of pain that morning, and his interactions with both Clay and Vanessa. Mike listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When Ray finished, he tapped his pen against his notepad thoughtfully. Individually, some of these things could be explained by grief. Kids process loss differently than adults. But collectively, he frowned. Has the boy said anything directly about being hurt or afraid? No, Ray admitted. But he's avoiding going home. That much is clear. What do you know about the stepmother? Beyond the Oak Ridge gossip mill. Ray shook his head. Not much. She moved here from Arizona about 8 months ago. Works for Summit Realty. She's apparently one of their top sellers already. Met Mark while helping him list Elena's childhood home after she died. Mike raised an eyebrow. Quick work that. Elena passes in January, and they're married by April. He made another note. Any prior connections to Oak Ridge? None that I know of. She's definitely an outsider. Doesn't participate in community events. Keeps to herself except for work functions. And Mark? What's your read on him? Ray considered this carefully. Mark's always been a good father. Involved, attentive. But lately he's been absent, working late, missing Clay's events. Linda ran into him at the grocery store and said he seemed distant, not himself. Grief, new marriage, maybe financial pressure, Mike mused. Could explain some changes. But it doesn't explain potential bruises on his kid. He set down his pen. Here's the thing, Ray. What you're describing is concerning. But it's not enough for us to open an investigation or even do a welfare check without raising red flags. Child Protective Services requires more concrete evidence. So what, we wait until the kid shows up with a broken arm? Ray's frustration leaked into his voice. Mike held up a placating hand. I didn't say do nothing. I said we need more. Has Clay written anything in that notebook you mentioned? Something that might indicate what's happening at home? I don't know. I didn't look inside. It was marked private. Respectable, Mike acknowledged with a nod. All right, here's what I suggest. Keep building rapport with Clay. See if he'll open up to you. Document everything you observe, dates, times, specific behaviors or comments. And I'll do some quiet digging into Vanessa's background. See if there's anything there we should know about. Ray nodded, somewhat appeased. What about the school? Principal Harrington and Clay's teacher are both concerned. They should document their observations too. The more patterns we can establish, the stronger our case if we need to involve CPS. Mike leaned forward, his expression serious. Ray, I know you care about this kid, but we have to be careful about how we proceed. If we move too quickly without enough evidence, we could make things worse. I understand, Ray said, though the thought of Clay spending even one more day in a potentially abusive situation made his stomach knot. But I'm not going to let this go. Mike smiled slightly. I never thought you would. It's not in your nature. Just tread carefully, all right? And keep me updated. As Ray stood to leave, Mike added, Oh, and Linda wants you to know she's making her lasagna for Sunday dinner. Says to tell you Monica and the kids are coming too. Ray nodded, his mood lifting slightly at the thought of seeing his daughter and grandchildren. Wouldn't miss it. Leaving the police station, Ray checked his watch. He had just enough time to grab lunch before his afternoon routes began. But as he walked toward the diner on the corner, his thoughts remained with Clay Miller and what might be happening behind the tidy white fence and navy shutters of the house on Willow Drive. The remainder of the week passed with Ray paying closer attention to Clay during the morning and afternoon bus rides. Each day, the boy seemed to withdraw further into himself, speaking only when directly addressed and spending the rides staring out the window or pretending to read a book that Ray noticed never seemed to have its pages turned. On Thursday afternoon, Ray observed something that deepened his concern. As the children lined up to board the bus after school, he spotted Clay hanging back, deliberately moving to the end of the line. When he finally climbed the steps, Ray noticed a fresh bruise peeking out from under his right sleeve. A distinct pattern of finger marks, as if someone had grabbed his arm with considerable force. Everything okay, Clay? Ray asked quietly as the boy passed. Clay tugged his sleeve down hurriedly. Fell during gym, he muttered without making eye contact, then continued to his usual seat. Ray frowned, marking the observation in the small notebook he'd begun keeping in his shirt pocket. The finger-shaped bruises didn't match with a fall, and Ray had seen enough injuries during his time in the service and raising an active daughter to know the difference. That evening, he shared his observations with Linda over dinner. Finger marks, Linda repeated, her nurse's training immediately engaged. That's concerning, Ray. That's a grip bruise, not an accidental injury. I know, Ray said grimly. I called Mike again. He's been looking into Vanessa's background but hasn't found anything actionable yet. Just that she's moved around a lot in the past 5 years, Arizona, Nevada, California. Linda set down her fork, her expression troubled. What about Mark? Have you tried talking to him directly? I've been trying to catch him, but he's rarely home when I drive past. His car's always at the insurance office until late. Ray pushed his plate away, his appetite diminished. I'm thinking of stopping by there tomorrow. Just be careful how you approach it, Linda cautioned. If Vanessa is hurting Clay, and Mark confronts her about it. Ray nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. I won't mention my suspicions directly. Just check in, friend to friend, about how Clay's doing after losing his mom. Later that night, as Ray and Linda prepared for bed, the phone rang. Linda answered, her expression shifting to concern as she listened. Yes, he's right here. Just a moment. She handed the phone to Ray. It's Mike. Ray took the phone, his brother-in-law's voice coming through with an edge of urgency. Ray, I found something you should know about. Vanessa Miller wasn't always Vanessa Chambers. Her maiden name was Vanessa Lowell, and before Arizona, she lived in Oregon. She was married to a doctor there, a widower with a young son. What happened? Ray asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. The marriage lasted less than a year. There was a CPS investigation after the boy's teacher reported concerns about emotional abuse and neglect, but before it could be completed, Vanessa filed for divorce and disappeared. Changed her name to Chambers, her mother's maiden name, I'm guessing, and turned up in Phoenix 6 months later. Ray sank onto the edge of the bed, Linda sitting beside him with a concerned expression. And the boy? What happened to him? Returned to his maternal grandparents' custody. The file's sealed because it involves a minor, so I couldn't get all the details without raising flags. But one of my academy buddies works in Portland now. He remembered the case. Said the kid was severely malnourished and showing signs of psychological trauma when they finally got him out. Jesus, Ray muttered, running a hand over his face. And there were no charges filed against her? She was gone before the investigation concluded. Left the state, changed her name. The ex-husband apparently just wanted to focus on getting his son the help he needed, not pursuing criminal charges. Mike paused. Ray, this establishes a pattern. If she's done this before, she could be doing it to Clay now, Ray finished, meeting Linda's troubled gaze. What do? We can't just wait for more evidence while that boy suffers. Document everything, Mike emphasized. I'll expedite what I can from the Oregon case. See if we can build enough for a welfare check. In the meantime, keep an eye on Clay. If you see anything that constitutes immediate danger, I'll call you right away, Ray promised. After hanging up, Ray relayed the conversation to Linda, who listened with growing concern. That poor child, she said softly. And Mark has no idea about her history? Apparently not. According to Mike, she's quite skilled at presenting herself as the perfect wife and stepmother in public. And Mark's been so consumed by grief and work. Linda took his hand. You have to find a way to reach Clay, to let him know he can trust you if he needs help. Ray nodded, determination settling over him. I will. I promise. Friday morning dawned gray and rainy, matching Ray's somber mood as he navigated the bus through Oak Ridge's wet streets. The rhythmic swish of windshield wipers provided a hypnotic backdrop to his troubled thoughts about Clay and what might be happening in the Miller household. When he pulled up to the elementary school, Ray noticed Clay was among the last children to board, his dark curls plastered to his forehead from the rain. No umbrella or raincoat in sight despite the downpour. The boy's t-shirt was soaked through, clinging to his thin frame and revealing how much weight he'd lost over the past months. Morning, Clay. Ray greeted him, unable to keep the concern from his voice. You're soaked through. No raincoat today. Clay shrugged, water dripping from his hair onto his already wet shoulders. Couldn't find it, he mumbled. But there was something in the way his eyes darted away that suggested more to the story. Here, Ray said, reaching behind his seat to pull out a small towel he kept for emergencies. Dry off a bit. Don't want you catching cold. Clay accepted the towel with a surprised look, as if unused to such small kindnesses. Thanks, Mr. Ray, he said quietly, rubbing at his wet hair as he made his way to his usual seat. Throughout the morning route, Ray kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching as Clay sat huddled and shivering despite the bus's heating system. The other children chattered and laughed around him, but Clay remained isolated in his silent bubble, staring out at the rain-streaked landscape with hollow eyes. When the bus emptied at the elementary school, Ray made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called the transportation department, requesting a substitute driver for his afternoon routes. Something he'd done only twice in 15 years, both times for family emergencies. After completing his middle school route, Ray drove the bus back to the depot and headed straight for downtown insurance, where Mark Miller worked as an agent. The small office was located in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, its wraparound porch now serving as additional waiting area for clients. The receptionist, a young woman Ray didn't recognize, looked up with a professional smile as he entered. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to speak with Mark Miller if he's available," Ray replied, removing his cap and running a hand through his short gray hair. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm a friend. Ray Donovan. I drive his son's school bus." The receptionist's expression softened slightly. "Let me see if he's free. Have a seat." Ray settled into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, observing the framed insurance certifications and community service awards on the walls. Among them was a plaque recognizing Downtown Insurance's contribution to last year's school fundraiser, an event Elena Miller had helped organize before her death. A few minutes later, Mark Miller emerged from one of the private offices, his expression curious but friendly. At 42, Mark had always maintained a youthful appearance, but Ray immediately noticed changes in the man he'd known through community basketball and school events. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he'd lost weight, his once athletic frame now appearing almost gaunt in his well-tailored suit. "Ray," Mark said, extending his hand. "This is a surprise. Is everything okay? Is Clay all right?" The immediate concern for his son gave Ray a moment of hope. Whatever was happening in the Miller home, it seemed Mark still cared deeply for Clay. "Clay's at school," Ray assured him. "I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes, if you're not too busy." Mark glanced at his watch, hesitation crossing his features before he nodded. "Sure. I've got about 20 minutes before my next appointment. Come on back to my office." Ray followed him through the reception area to a small but tidy office overlooking Main Street. Photos adorned Mark's desk, including one of Elena and Clay from what appeared to be a beach vacation, both smiling broadly at the camera. Another showed Mark and Vanessa on their wedding day, her smile perfect but somehow not reaching her eyes. Ray noticed there were no photos of all three of them together, Vanessa, Mark, and Clay. "What can I do for you, Ray?" Mark asked as they sat down, his tone friendly but with an undercurrent of wariness. Ray chose his words carefully. "I wanted to check in, see how you and Clay are doing. I know these past few months have been incredibly difficult." Something flickered across Mark's face, a mixture of grief and guilt. "We're managing. Some days are better than others." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Ray of Clay. "It's been an adjustment for everyone." Clay was very close to his mother, Ray noted gently. "How's he handling everything? The loss, the changes at home?" Mark's gaze dropped to the photo of Elena and Clay. "He's struggling, I know, but kids are resilient, right? Vanessa says we shouldn't coddle him, that it'll just prolong the grief." He didn't sound entirely convinced of this approach. "She's been arranging tutors, extra activities, keeping him busy." Ray nodded, maintaining a neutral expression despite his internal alarm at Vanessa's philosophy on grief. "I've noticed some changes in Clay on my route. He used to be so talkative, always excited to get home. Lately he seems withdrawn, quieter." "The school mentioned something similar," Mark admitted, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his features. "Vanessa thinks it's just a phase, that he's testing boundaries with her as the new authority figure." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "It's been hard, trying to balance everything, work, home, helping Clay while still giving Vanessa space to establish her role. I've been putting in extra hours here to cover the new expenses." Vanessa had some ideas for updating the house, enrolling Clay in some premium academic programs. Ray recognized the signs of a man overwhelmed by grief, by work, by a new marriage, by financial pressures. It created the perfect blind spot for someone like Vanessa to exploit. Mark, Ray said carefully, I've been driving kids to and from school for 15 years. I've seen all kinds of family situations. If Clay is struggling more than you realize, it wouldn't be unusual. Sometimes kids find it easier to talk to someone outside the family. Mark looked up, his expression a mixture of defensiveness and genuine concern. What are you saying, Ray? Has Clay said something to you? Not directly, Ray admitted, but I'm concerned about him. This morning he showed up in the rain without a coat or umbrella, soaked to the skin. He's lost weight, and he seems. Ray hesitated, then decided to be direct. Afraid to go home sometimes. Mark's face paled slightly, but before he could respond, his office door opened without a knock. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her expression pleasant but her eyes sharp as they moved from Mark to Ray. Darling, your 11:30 is here early. I told Amber I'd let you know. Her voice was smooth as silk, but there was an underlying tension in her posture as she assessed Ray. Mr. Donovan, isn't it? The bus driver. Ray stood, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the chill that ran down his spine at Vanessa's perfectly timed interruption. Mrs. Miller. Yes. I just stopped by to chat with Mark about some community center activities. The lie came easily, a protective instinct kicking in. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. How nice. Mark is so dedicated to this community, aren't you, dear? Though he's been so busy lately, I've been handling most of Clay's activities and appointments myself. There was something proprietary in the way she placed her hand on Mark's shoulder. We're a team now. Mark nodded, but Ray didn't miss the momentary flash of uncertainty in his eyes. Thanks for stopping by, Ray. I should get to my appointment. Of course, Ray said, moving toward the door. Good to see you, Mark. Mrs. Miller. Vanessa's smile remained fixed as she stepped aside to let Ray pass. Mr. Donovan, I've been meaning to ask. Clay mentioned he lost a notebook on the bus earlier this week? Something his mother gave him? The question caught Ray off guard, though he kept his expression neutral. Yes, I found it and returned it to him the next morning. Seemed important to him. Something dangerous flickered in Vanessa's eyes, though her pleasant expression never wavered. Yes, well, we're trying to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling in the past. Perhaps next time you could return such items to me or Mark directly. We're working with Clay on responsibility for his belongings. The implication was clear. Stay out of our family business. Ray forced a polite nod. I'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Miller. You folks have a good day now. As Ray walked back to his truck, a sense of urgency propelled him. The brief interaction with Vanessa had confirmed his worst suspicions. The calculated way she'd interrupted, her subtle assertion of control over Mark, the pointed comment about the notebook. All of it suggested someone accustomed to manipulating situations and maintaining a perfect facade. More concerning was her specific mention of Clay's notebook. Had she been looking for it? Did she know what Clay had written inside? The thought that she might be monitoring or restricting the boy's private thoughts sent a wave of anger through Ray. He pulled out his phone and called Mike as he climbed into his truck. Mike, it's Ray. I just met Vanessa Miller in person. We need to move faster on this. That woman is bad news, and Clay's not safe. As he started his truck, rain pelting the windshield, Ray made a silent promise to the boy who rode in the third seat on the right side of his bus. He wouldn't let another day go by without finding a way to help Clay Miller. Rain continued to fall throughout the weekend, matching Ray's somber mood as he mulled over his concerns about Clay Miller. The brief confrontation with Vanessa on Friday had only heightened his alarm, her polished veneer momentarily revealing something calculating and cold beneath. Mike had called Saturday evening with an update. I've got a contact at Portland PD sending over what they can from the previous case involving Vanessa Lowell. It'll take a few days to get through official channels, but it should give us more to work with. A few days might be too long, Ray had responded, pacing the living room while Linda watched with concern from the kitchen doorway. I understand your frustration, but we have to work within the system, Mike had reminded him. In the meantime, document everything. Any mark, any comment, any behavior that seems off. And if you see something that constitutes immediate danger, I'll call 911, Ray had promised. Now, as Tuesday morning dawned with the same persistent rain that had characterized the past several days, Ray found himself watching the clock anxiously, waiting for his route to begin. The weekend had stretched endlessly, leaving him unable to check on Clay until today. He'd driven past the Miller house twice on Sunday, noting Mark's car was absent both times. The drawn curtains and still exterior had offered no clues about what might be happening inside. Linda placed a mug of coffee in front of him, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Try to eat something," she urged, nodding toward the untouched toast on his plate. "Not hungry," Ray replied, though he picked up a piece to appease her. "I just keep thinking about that boy, Lynn. What if something happens before we can help him?" Linda took the seat across from him, her nurse's eyes evaluating his exhausted expression. "You're doing everything you can within the bounds of the law, Ray. Remember what Mike said. Rushing in without proper evidence could make things worse." Ray nodded reluctantly, knowing she was right but hating the feeling of helplessness. "I've got a bad feeling about today. Can't explain it." "Trust your instincts," Linda said, squeezing his hand. "They've served you well all these years. Just be careful." The drive to the bus depot was tense, rain hammering against the windshield as Ray navigated through the early morning darkness. The town was just beginning to stir, lights appearing in windows as residents prepared for the day ahead. Ray completed his pre-trip inspection mechanically, his mind focused on what lay ahead rather than the familiar routine. As he guided the large yellow bus through the still quiet streets of Oak Ridge, Ray found himself paying particular attention to the neighborhoods leading to Clay's stop. The Miller house would be his 14th stop of the morning, and with each mile that brought him closer, the knot in Ray's stomach tightened. Children boarded at their usual stops, most of them subdued by the gloomy weather and early hour. Ray greeted each one by name, maintaining his routine while keeping an eye on the time. When he finally pulled up to the corner of Willow and Oak, his heart sank. Clay wasn't at his usual waiting spot beneath the large maple tree. Ray waited an extra 30 seconds, scanning the street for any sign of the boy. Just as he was about to close the doors and reluctantly move on to the next stop, a small figure appeared, running through the rain without a coat or umbrella. Ray's chest tightened as Clay climbed aboard, soaked once again and breathing hard. "Morning, Clay," Ray said gently, immediately noting the dark circles beneath the boy's eyes and a new, faint bruise near his jawline, partially concealed by the wet curls plastered to his face. "Sorry I'm late," Clay mumbled, eyes downcast as he moved past Ray toward his usual seat. Throughout the ride to school, Ray kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching as Clay stared out the window, seemingly oblivious to the cheerful conversations of the other children around him. The boy's isolation was palpable, a bubble of silence amid the typical morning chaos of an elementary school bus. When they reached Oak Ridge Elementary, Ray made a decision. As the children filed out into the rain toward the building, he called out, "Clay, could you hang back a moment?" Clay froze, a momentary flicker of fear crossing his features before he nodded, stepping to the side as the other children passed. When the bus had emptied, Ray turned in his seat to face the boy directly. "How are you doing, really?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle but direct. Clay shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. "Fine. That's a new bruise," Ray observed, nodding toward the mark on Clay's jaw. "Want to tell me how you got it?" Clay's hand went automatically to his face, his fingers lightly touching the discolored area before dropping back to his side. "I fell," he said, the explanation sounding hollow and rehearsed. Ray considered his next words carefully. "Clay, I've been driving this route since before you started kindergarten. I've watched you grow up, and I can tell when something's not right." He paused, making sure to keep his tone non-threatening. "If someone is hurting you, I want you to know that you can tell me. I can help." Something flickered in Clay's eyes, a mixture of longing and fear. For a moment it seemed he might speak, but then the school bell rang, startling them both. "I have to go," Clay said quickly, backing toward the door. "I'll be late." "Clay," Ray called, stopping him before he could exit. I'm here. Every morning and every afternoon. Whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here. Clay gave a barely perceptible nod before darting out into the rain. His thin shoulders hunched as he ran toward the school building. Ray watched him go, the knot in his stomach tightening further. He'd done what he could for now. Planted the seed, offered a lifeline. But as he closed the doors and put the bus in gear to continue his route, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The day dragged endlessly, each hour stretching as Ray went through the motions of his various routes. Middle school, high school, sports teams. All while his thoughts remained fixed on Clay Miller and what awaited him at home. By the time the afternoon elementary route arrived, Ray found himself gripping the wheel with unusual tension, his eyes scanning the groups of children emerging from the school building. Clay appeared among the last students, walking slowly despite the continuing rain. He climbed aboard without making eye contact, water dripping from his hair and clothes as he made his way to his seat. Ray noted that he still had no coat or umbrella, despite the steady downpour that had continued all day. As the bus filled with chattering children, Ray kept his focus split between the road and his rearview mirror, where he could see Clay sitting quietly in his usual spot. The boy's expression was distant, almost resigned, as he stared out at the rainy landscape passing by. One by one, children disembarked at their stops, the bus gradually emptying as they wound through the neighborhoods of Oak Ridge. Ray found himself driving more slowly as they approached Willow and Oak, his instincts screaming that something significant was about to happen. When he finally pulled to a stop at Clay's corner, he opened the doors and called out gently, "Your stop, Clay." But the boy didn't move. He remained frozen in his seat, knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the vinyl cushion. From the rearview mirror, Ray could see tears welling in Clay's eyes, though he seemed to be fighting them back with all his might. Ray turned in his seat, concern etched across his features. "Clay, everything okay, buddy?" The few remaining children on the bus had grown quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Mia Jefferson, a fifth grader sitting near the back, caught Ray's eye with a worried look. Ray gave her a reassuring nod before returning his attention to Clay. "I can't," Clay whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of rain on the roof. "Can't what, Clay?" Ray asked gently, his heart pounding. "Can't go home." Clay's voice cracked, a single tear escaping despite his efforts to contain it. "Not today." Ray made a quick decision. "Mia, could you move to a seat near the front, please? Clay and I need to talk for a minute." The fifth grader nodded, gathering her backpack and moving forward without question. Once she was settled, Ray stood and moved to sit across the aisle from Clay, close enough to talk privately but maintaining enough distance not to overwhelm the clearly distressed child. "Talk to me, Clay," Ray said softly. "What's happening that makes you not want to go home?" Clay's breath hitched, his small shoulders shaking with the effort of maintaining control. "She'll be mad," he whispered. "I got a C on my math test. She says only stupid kids get CS." His voice dropped even lower. "She says I'm stupid like my mom." Ray felt a surge of anger at those cruel words, but kept his expression neutral, not wanting to frighten Clay. "Your mom was a teacher, wasn't she? She was very smart." Clay nodded, wiping at his eyes with his sleeve. "She said math was hard for her too. She used to help me with flashcards and stuff." His face crumpled slightly. "Vanessa tore them up. Said they were baby stuff." "What happens when Vanessa gets mad, Clay?" Ray asked gently, though he dreaded the answer. Clay was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible as he weighed the consequences of speaking against the burden of silence. Finally, almost inaudibly, he replied, "She hurts me." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ray took a careful breath, knowing that how he responded now was crucial. "Can you tell me how she hurts you?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Clay's gaze remained fixed on his hands, which twisted nervously in his lap. "She pinches really hard, or grabs my arm so tight it leaves marks." He swallowed hard, Sometimes she locks me in the closet under the stairs when Dad's at work. Says it's to teach me to be grateful. His voice dropped to a whisper again. Last night she hit me. Here. He touched the bruise on his jaw. Because I dropped a glass. She said if I told Dad, she'd tell him I was lying to get attention, and that he'd send me away because I was too much trouble. Ray's military training was the only thing that kept his expression controlled as Clay continued, each word revealing a new horror. She doesn't let me eat sometimes. Says I have to earn meals by being perfect. Clay's thin frame suddenly made terrible sense. And she reads my journal. The one Mom gave me. That's why I was so scared when I lost it on the bus. She'd be really mad if she knew what I wrote in there. What did you write, Clay? Ray asked, suspecting he already knew the answer. The truth, Clay whispered, about what she does, and how much I miss my mom. He looked up at Ray finally, his eyes reflecting a depth of pain no child should know. I wrote that I think she hates me because Dad loved Mom first. And because... He hesitated. Because sometimes I think he still does. Ray made a decision then, one that would change multiple lives irrevocably. Clay, I'm not taking you home today. Relief and fear warred in the boy's expression. Where are we going? To people who can help, Ray said firmly. To the police station where we'll talk to my brother-in-law, Detective Callahan. He'll know what to do to keep you safe. She'll be so mad, Clay whispered, genuine terror flashing across his features. She won't be able to hurt you anymore, Ray promised, wishing he could guarantee it absolutely. What you just told me is very brave, and it's also enough for the police to make sure you're protected. Clay seemed to consider this, his small frame still tense with fear but something else appearing in his eyes. A glimmer of hope, perhaps. Finally, he gave a small nod. Ray returned to the driver's seat, picking up the bus radio. Dispatch, this is Bus 17. I need to make an unscheduled stop at the Oak Ridge police station. I have a student welfare situation. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Understood. Bus 17. Do you need immediate assistance? Ray glanced back at Clay, who was watching him with a mixture of terror and fragile hope. Negative. Just notify Detective Callahan that Ray Donovan is coming in with Clay Miller. It's regarding what we discussed. Copy that, Bus 17. We'll alert Detective Callahan. Ray put the bus in gear, heart pounding as he drove past Clay's stop toward downtown Oak Ridge. In the rearview mirror, he could see the remaining students watching with wide eyes, curiosity mixed with concern. Mia Jefferson caught his gaze again, and Ray saw understanding dawn on her young face. She'd witnessed Clay's changes too, he realized. Children often notice things adults missed. Mr. Ray. Clay's voice was small but steady. What's going to happen now? It was the question Ray had been dreading, because he couldn't offer simple reassurances. The system designed to protect children was complex and sometimes flawed. But he owed Clay honesty. The police will take your statement. That means they'll listen to what you've told me and write it down officially. There will probably be someone there specially trained to talk to kids about these kinds of situations. Ray kept his explanation straightforward. They'll likely call your dad to come to the station, and they'll make sure you're somewhere safe tonight. Not with Vanessa? Clay asked, the fear returning to his voice. No, Ray said firmly. Not with Vanessa. As they approached the police station, Ray could see Mike already waiting on the steps, alerted by the dispatcher's call. The detective's expression was professionally neutral, but Ray could read the concern in his brother-in-law's stance. Pulling the bus to a stop in front of the station, Ray turned to the remaining students. I need to help Clay with something important. Another bus will come to take you home. Please wait here quietly. The children nodded solemnly, the usual after-school chatter subdued by the unusual situation. Ray moved back to sit beside Clay. Ready? He asked gently. Clay looked toward the police station, his small shoulders squaring slightly despite the fear still evident in his eyes. I think so. You're being very brave, Ray told him. And I'll be with you the whole time. Together, they descended the bus steps into the rain, where Mike waited with an umbrella. The detective crouched down to Clay's level, his voice gentle but professional. "Hi, Clay. I'm Detective Callahan. Mr. Donovan here says you have something important to tell us. Why don't we go inside where it's dry and comfortable?" Clay looked up at Ray, who nodded encouragingly. The boy took a deep breath and then slipped his small hand into Ray's larger one, the gesture of trust nearly breaking the bus driver's composure. As they climbed the steps to the station, Ray knew that what lay ahead would be difficult for everyone involved. There would be questions, examinations, and painful revelations. The system would grind into motion, with all its imperfections and bureaucracy. But watching Clay walk with his head a little higher, his grip firm despite the slight trembling of his fingers, Ray knew they had crossed a threshold. Whatever happened next, Clay Miller had found his voice. And Ray would make damn sure that someone listened. The Oak Ridge Police Station's interview room was designed to be non-threatening, with comfortable chairs, neutral-colored walls, and a small table in the center. Still, there was no disguising its purpose, and Clay's eyes darted nervously around the space as they entered. "Would you like something to drink, Clay? Water? Maybe some hot chocolate to warm up?" Mike asked, his tone gentle. Clay glanced at Ray, who nodded encouragingly. "Hot chocolate, please," the boy said quietly. While Mike stepped out to arrange for the drink, Ray sat with Clay, explaining what would happen next. "Detective Callahan is going to ask you some questions about what you told me on the bus. A lady named Ms. Reeves from Child Protective Services will be joining us too. She specializes in helping kids who are in tough situations at home." "Will I have to tell them everything?" Clay asked, his voice small. "The more you can tell them, the better they can help you," Ray replied honestly. "But you don't have to say anything you're not comfortable with right now. The important thing is that you're safe." The door opened, and Mike returned with a steaming mug of hot chocolate, followed by a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Clay, this is Ms. Reeves from CPS," Mike introduced her. "She's here to make sure everything goes smoothly." "Hello, Clay," Ms. Reeves said, taking a seat across from them. "I understand today has been pretty overwhelming for you. We just want to have a conversation about what's been happening at home. Okay? Nothing you say will get you in trouble." Clay nodded, his hands wrapped around the warm mug like a lifeline. "Would you prefer if Mr. Donovan stayed with you during our talk?" Ms. Reeves asked perceptively. "Yes, please," Clay whispered, glancing up at Ray. "That's fine," she assured him. "Now, can you tell us a bit about what's been happening with your stepmother, Vanessa?" For the next 45 minutes, Clay slowly unwound his story, each detail more disturbing than the last. The withholding of food, the isolation in the closet, the emotional abuse. A systematic campaign to break down a child already devastated by the loss of his mother. Ray remained beside him, a steady presence as the boy recounted incidents that made the seasoned detective's jaw tighten and Ms. Reeves take more notes than usual. "She takes my journal every night to read it," Clay explained. "That's why I was so scared when I lost it on the bus. I wrote about what she does when Dad's not home." "And where is your dad during these times?" Mike asked gently. "Working, mostly. He has to work lots of extra hours now because Vanessa wanted new furniture and stuff." Clay's voice dropped. "Dad's really tired when he comes home. Sometimes he doesn't even eat dinner, just goes to bed. Vanessa says he works so hard because I'm expensive." The cruelty of such a statement to a grieving child made Ray's hands clench into fists beneath the table. "Has your dad seen any of the bruises or noticed you weren't eating regular meals?" Ms. Reeves inquired. Clay shook his head. "Vanessa makes me wear long sleeves when he's home, and she tells him I ate earlier if he asks about dinner." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't think he knows. But what if he doesn't believe me? What if he's mad that I told?" "Your father loves you very much," Ray said firmly, believing it despite Mark Miller's recent blind spots. "He would never want anyone to hurt you, Clay." As the interview continued, a nurse from Memorial Hospital arrived to document Clay's physical condition. The evidence was damning. Bruises in various stages of healing on his arms, ribs, and back. Weight loss significant enough to indicate potential malnutrition, and the fresh mark on his jawline that matched the description of being struck the previous evening. Through it all, Clay maintained a composure that was heartbreaking in one so young, as if he'd grown accustomed to hiding his pain to survive. Only when describing his journal and the letters he wrote to his deceased mother did his voice crack with raw emotion. "My mom wanted me to write down my feelings," he explained. "She said it would help when I was sad or mad or confused. But Vanessa says it's stupid and babyish." Mike exchanged a look with Ms. Reeves before asking gently, "Clay, does your journal contain descriptions of the times Vanessa hurt you?" Clay nodded. "I wrote down everything, with dates, like Mom taught me for my science projects." "That's very smart," Mike said, genuine admiration in his voice. "That journal would be very helpful for us to read, if you'd be willing to share it." "It's in my backpack," Clay said, reaching for the worn bag beside his chair. "I started keeping it with me after Mr. Ray found it and gave it back. I was afraid Vanessa would take it away forever." The journal, with its carefully printed private warning on the cover, was placed on the table. Mike handled it with respect, asking, "Would it be okay if Ms. Reeves and I read this as part of our investigation?" Clay hesitated only briefly before nodding. "It's the truth," he said simply. "Mom always said the truth was important, even when it's hard." As Mike carefully bagged the journal as evidence, the door to the interview room opened, and a uniformed officer leaned in to whisper something to the detective. Mike's expression turned grim before he schooled his features back to professional neutrality. "Clay, Mr. Donovan, would you excuse me for a moment? Ms. Reeves will stay with you." After Mike left, Ms. Reeves engaged Clay in a more casual conversation about school and his interests, giving the boy a moment to breathe after the intensity of the interview. Ray watched as Clay gradually relaxed, answering questions about his favorite books and subjects with hints of the enthusiasm that had once characterized him. When the door opened again several minutes later, Mike's expression was controlled but troubled. "Ray, could I speak with you outside for a moment? Will you be okay with Ms. Reeves for a minute?" Ray asked Clay, who nodded, though his eyes reflected renewed anxiety at the adult's serious expressions. In the hallway, Mike kept his voice low. Mark Miller just arrived. He received a call from Vanessa about Clay not getting off the bus. She's apparently been blowing up his phone, claiming Clay is missing and that she's frantic with worry. Ray's jaw tightened, playing the concerned stepmother. Typical. Mark is demanding to see Clay. He's pretty worked up. Combination of worry and confusion. Mike ran a hand through his hair. "I haven't told him why Clay is here yet. Thought you might want to be present for that conversation, given your relationship with both of them." Ray nodded grimly. "Where is he now?" "Waiting in my office. Vanessa is in the lobby. I didn't want her anywhere near Clay until we've sorted this out." "Smart move," Ray muttered, feeling a surge of protectiveness toward the boy who'd trusted him enough to reveal his private hell. "Let's talk to Mark first, without her. He needs to understand what's been happening before she can spin her version." Mike led the way to his office, where Mark Miller was pacing like a caged animal, his normally neat appearance disheveled from rushing from work. His head snapped up as they entered, relief and confusion battling for dominance in his expression when he recognized Ray. "Ray, what's going on? Where's Clay?" "The school called and said he never got off at his stop, and Vanessa is beside herself with worry." "Mark, sit down," Ray said firmly, using the authoritative tone he developed during his years in the Marines. Surprisingly, Mark complied, sinking into a chair across from Mike's desk. "Clay is here at the station," Mike explained, taking his seat. "He's safe, and he's with a caseworker from Child Protective Services right now." "Child Protective, what? Why?" Mark's confusion seemed genuine, which confirmed Ray's suspicion that the man had been entirely unaware of what was happening in his own home. "I don't understand. Why wouldn't he get off at his stop? Why bring him here instead of home?" Ray and Mike exchanged glances before Ray spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Mark, Clay asked me not to take him home today. He was afraid to go back to your house." "Afraid? That doesn't make any sense. Why would Clay be afraid to come home?" Mark's bewilderment began to shift toward defensiveness. "What exactly are you implying, Ray?" I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what your son told me. Ray kept his voice level. Clay says Vanessa has been hurting him when you're not home. Physically and emotionally. Mark's face drained of color. That's not possible. Vanessa loves Clay. She's been organizing tutors' activities, helping him adjust. Mark, Mike interjected gently but firmly. We have documented evidence of physical abuse. Multiple bruises in various stages of healing. Significant weight loss consistent with food being withheld. And a detailed journal Clay has kept describing the abuse. No. Mark shook his head in denial. There must be some misunderstanding. Clay's been going through a tough time since Elena died. Kids sometimes make up stories when they're having trouble adjusting. This isn't made up, Mark, Ray said, leaning forward. I've been watching the changes in Clay for weeks. The withdrawn behavior, the long sleeves regardless of weather, the fear in his eyes when it's time to go home. Today he was terrified to get off the bus because he got a C on a math test, and he knew Vanessa would punish him for it. Mark's expression crumpled, grief and shock warring on his features. A C? That's nothing to be punished for. Elena and I always just encouraged him to try his best. According to Clay, Vanessa told him only stupid kids get CS, and that he was stupid like his mother. Ray delivered this blow directly, knowing it might penetrate Mark's denial where other details had failed. Rage flashed across Mark's face, followed immediately by horror. She said that? About Elena? His voice broke on his late wife's name. No, Vanessa wouldn't say that. She knew how much Elena meant to both of us. Mike opened a folder on his desk, revealing photographs taken by the nurse just minutes earlier, clinical documentation of the bruises marking Clay's thin body. These were taken today, he said quietly, sliding the folder toward Mark. The bruise on his jaw is from last night. Clay says Vanessa hit him for dropping a glass. Mark stared at the photographs, his hands shaking as he turned each page. The evidence was undeniable, the pattern of abuse clear even to someone desperate not to see it. Oh God, he whispered. What have I done? What have I let happen to my son? Mark, Ray said, gentling his tone now that the father's denial was crumbling. Clay needs you right now. He needs to know you believe him and that you'll protect him. Of course I believe him. He's my son. Mark looked up, tears streaming down his face. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so blind? Grief does strange things to our perception, Mike said, his professional demeanor softening with compassion. And from what we've learned about Vanessa Miller, or Vanessa Lowell, as she was previously known, she's very skilled at presenting one face to the world while hiding another. Mark looked up sharply. What do you mean? Lowell? Mike exchanged a look with Ray before explaining. We've been conducting a background check on your wife. This isn't the first time she's been involved with allegations of child abuse. There was a similar situation in Oregon several years ago, involving her previous marriage to a widower with a young son. The color drained from Mark's face as Mike outlined what they discovered about Vanessa's past. The pattern of targeting grieving single fathers, the emotional and physical abuse of their children, the perfectly maintained public persona that allowed her to escape consequences each time. She found me at Elena's funeral, Mark said hollowly. Said she was new in town, wanted to pay respects because she'd heard such wonderful things about Elena from the real estate office. He buried his face in his hands. I thought it was fate, someone understanding what I was going through, someone to help with Clay when I was drowning in grief and work. I never thought, never imagined. Mark, Ray said firmly. What matters now is what you do next. Clay needs his father to stand up for him. Mark straightened, wiping roughly at his tears. I want to see my son, and then I want to know exactly what happens to make sure he's protected from her. Before you see Clay, you need to know that CPS will be making a determination about his immediate placement, Mike explained. Given the circumstances, it's unlikely they'll allow him to return home tonight if Vanessa has access to the residence. She won't, Mark said with sudden steel in his voice. I'll file for an emergency protection order. I'll move out with Clay if that's what it takes. but I'm not letting her near my son again. Mike nodded, satisfied with the response. That's a start. There will be an investigation, and Clay will need to speak with more specialists. It's going to be a process, Mark. I don't care how long it takes, Mark replied, standing up with renewed purpose. I just want my son safe. I want to see him now. Please. As they moved toward the door, Mike placed a hand on Mark's arm. One more thing you should know. Vanessa is still in the lobby, waiting. Would you prefer to speak with her now? Or after you've seen Clay? Mark's expression hardened. After. I need to see my son first. I need to tell him I believe him and that I'm sorry I didn't protect him. Ray felt a surge of hope at these words. Whatever mistakes Mark Miller had made in his grief-clouded judgment, it was clear he loved his son and would fight to protect him now that the truth had been revealed. As they walked down the hallway toward the interview room where Clay waited, Ray knew that the road ahead would not be easy for either father or son. There would be legal battles, therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and healing that would take far longer than the wounds had taken to inflict. But watching Mark straighten his shoulders as they approached the door, determination replacing the shock that had initially overwhelmed him, Ray also knew that Clay Miller would not have to face that road alone. The boy had found the courage to speak his truth, and now the adults in his life had the responsibility to ensure that truth led to justice and healing. When they opened the door and Clay looked up, the flash of hope and uncertainty in his eyes broke Ray's heart. But Mark's immediate movement to kneel beside his son's chair, gathering the boy carefully into his arms with a broken, "I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry," told Ray everything he needed to know. His decision to drive past that bus stop and straight to the police station had been the right one. Sometimes, the most important journeys didn't follow the usual route. The confrontation between Mark Miller and Vanessa in the police station lobby would remain seared in Ray's memory for years to come. He'd witnessed many things during his time in the Marines, the spectrum of human behavior at its most heroic and its most deplorable, but the calculated precision with which Vanessa Miller shifted between personas was unlike anything he'd seen before. She'd been pacing the lobby, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor, when Mark emerged from the back hallway. Ray and Mike hung back, giving the couple space while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. "Mark! Thank God!" Vanessa exclaimed, her face transforming into a mask of concern as she rushed toward her husband. "Did they find Clay? Is he okay? I've been worried sick." Her voice cracked with what would have seemed like genuine emotion to anyone who hadn't just seen the evidence of her abuse. Mark stopped several feet away from her, his posture rigid. "He's here. He's safe." Relief washed over Vanessa's features, but it was quickly replaced by confusion when Mark made no move to embrace her. "What's wrong? What's happened? Why would they bring him here instead of home?" "Because he was afraid to go home," Mark said, his voice flat. "Afraid of you." Vanessa's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, hurt, indignation, before settling on bewildered innocence. "Afraid of me? Mark, that's absurd. Why would Clay say such a thing?" "He didn't just say it," Mark replied, his tone hardening. "He showed it. The bruises, Vanessa, the weight loss, the terror in his eyes when he thought about facing you after getting a C on a math test." A flicker of something cold passed behind Vanessa's eyes before she recovered, placing a hand over her heart. "Bruises? Mark, you know how active he is, always climbing trees, riding that bike too fast. And he's been so picky about food since Elena passed. Children process grief in strange ways." She took a step toward him, reaching out. "I know he's been struggling, but to make up stories like this, they're not stories." Mark cut her off, stepping back to avoid her touch. "There's evidence, Vanessa, and not just from Oak Ridge." For the first time, true alarm registered on her face. "What are you talking about?" "Portland," Mark said simply. "Dr. Lowell's son. The CPS investigation you fled from by changing your name and disappearing. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable." The vulnerable concern in Vanessa's eyes hardened into something calculating and cold, her posture straightening as she realized her performance wasn't working. "So that's how it's going to be," she said, her voice losing its emotional timbre. The grieving boy makes up stories, and everyone rushes to believe him because poor little Clay lost his mommy. Her lip curled slightly. Did he tell you I locked him in closets too? That's his favorite tale. He used that one in Portland as well. Ray felt a chill at the casual way she confirmed the abuse while attempting to discredit it. Mark clearly felt it too, his face paling at the realization that his wife was not even bothering to deny the allegations anymore, merely trying to undermine their credibility. "You're admitting it," Mark said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "I'm admitting nothing," Vanessa replied coolly. "I'm pointing out that children like Clay, children damaged by loss, often fabricate stories for attention. In Portland, my stepson claimed similar abuses. His father eventually saw through the manipulation, but not before our marriage was damaged beyond repair." "Except the medical evidence supported the boy's claims," Mike interjected, stepping forward with his badge visible. "Just as it supports Clay's claims now." Vanessa's eyes narrowed as she addressed the detective. "Evidence can be misinterpreted. Children bruise easily, and grieving children often harm themselves for attention." Her voice took on a rehearsed quality, as if she'd made these arguments before. "I've only tried to provide structure and discipline in a household that was drowning in grief and misplaced sentimentality. Structure and discipline don't leave finger-shaped bruises," Mark snapped, finding his voice again. "They don't involve telling a 9-year-old boy he's stupid like his dead mother." Something ugly flashed across Vanessa's perfect features. Elena coddled him, made him soft. Everything was about feelings and creativity and self-expression. She practically spat the words. "The real world doesn't reward feelings, Mark. It rewards achievement excellence. I was trying to prepare him for reality. By starving him? By locking him in a closet? By hitting him?" Mark's voice rose with each question, his control slipping. "That's not discipline, Vanessa. That's abuse." "It's whatever you want to call it," she replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But you'll never make charges stick. Not with my lawyers. Not with my resources." Her smile turned cold. "Remember who paid off your debt after Elena's medical bills, Mark. Remember who holds the mortgage on your precious family home now." Mark took a step toward her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I don't care about the house or the money. I care about my son." "Funny," Vanessa replied, tilting her head. "You didn't seem to care much these past few months when you were working late every night, leaving him with me. When you were too exhausted to even ask about his day or check on him before bed." Her voice turned venomous. "Face it, Mark. You were happy to hand him off to me so you could wallow in your grief and throw yourself into work. Clay was an inconvenient reminder of what you'd lost." Mark recoiled as if slapped, the painful kernel of truth in her accusation landing with precision. "That's enough," Ray interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Mark may have been struggling, but he never intended for his son to suffer. Vanessa turned her cold gaze on Ray. "Ah, the heroic bus driver. Tell me, Mr. Donovan, does interfering in other people's families make you feel important? Does it fill some void left by your own failures?" Before Ray could respond, Mike stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, you're currently the subject of an active investigation involving allegations of child abuse. I suggest you contact an attorney and refrain from making further statements without legal representation." Vanessa's smile was chilling in its confidence. "Of course, detective. I know exactly how these things work." She turned to Mark, her expression hardening. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." With that, she turned and strode toward the exit, pausing only to add over her shoulder, "I'll have my things out of the house by morning. My attorney will be in touch about the mortgage and other financial matters." The glass doors swung shut behind her with a definitive thud. Mark stood frozen, the full weight of his wife's true nature and his own blindness crashing down on him. "How could I have been so stupid?" he whispered, more to himself than to the others. "How could I not have seen?" Ray placed a hand on his shoulder. "She targeted you when you were most vulnerable, Mark. She's done this before, and she was skilled at hiding her true nature." "But Clay tried to tell me," Mark said, his voice breaking. Not directly, but there were signs. He stopped talking at dinner. He flinched when she'd reach for him. He didn't want to be left alone with her. His face crumpled. I told myself he was just adjusting to having a stepmother, that he'd come around eventually. I never imagined she was hurting him. The important thing now is that you know the truth, Mike said firmly, and that you're choosing to protect Clay going forward. Mark nodded, squaring his shoulders with renewed determination. What happens next? Legally, we'll file the charges, Mike explained. Child endangerment, physical abuse, possibly emotional abuse as well, though that's harder to prove in court. The evidence from Clay's medical exam and his journal will be crucial. CPS will continue their assessment and make recommendations regarding custody arrangements. Will they take him away from me? Mark asked, the fear evident in his voice. Mike sighed. I can't promise anything, but given that you've demonstrated immediate protective action and willingness to cooperate, it's more likely they'll implement a safety plan that allows Clay to remain in your care under supervision. I'll do whatever it takes, Mark vowed. Whatever they require. As they walked back toward the room where Clay waited with Ms. Reeves, Ray couldn't help but reflect on how quickly life could change course. Just hours ago, Clay had been suffering in silence, trapped in a home with a woman who systematically abused him. Now, though the road ahead would be difficult, at least the truth had been uncovered, giving way to the possibility of healing. The next 48 hours unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings, interviews, and difficult conversations. Ray remained involved throughout, providing statements to police and CPS, and serving as a supportive presence for Clay when needed. Ms. Reeves, the CPS caseworker, had determined that Clay could remain with Mark under a temporary safety plan, provided they relocated to a different residence while the investigation continued. The Miller home was considered compromised, not only because of the abuse that had occurred there, but also due to Vanessa's legal claims on the property. Mark's brother, Thomas, offered his guest house in Fairfield, 20 miles from Oak Ridge, as a temporary sanctuary. This arrangement satisfied CPS's requirements for a safe environment while allowing Clay to remain with his father and continue attending Oak Ridge Elementary, though the commute would be challenging. I can adjust my routes, Ray had offered when Mark mentioned the transportation concern during a meeting at the police station. Pick Clay up on my way into town and drop him off after my afternoon routes. At least until you get permanent arrangements sorted out. Mark had been overwhelmed by the gesture. Ray, you've already done so much. It's no trouble, Ray had insisted. I pass within a mile of Fairfield on my way in anyway. The truth was, Ray couldn't imagine simply returning to his normal routine now. The protective instinct he developed toward Clay wouldn't allow it, and something told him that the boy needed continuity. A familiar face, a stable presence during this turbulent time. By Thursday morning, a new rhythm had been established. Ray would arrive at Thomas Miller's guest house at 7:15 a.m., where Clay would be waiting, usually sitting on the front steps with his backpack beside him. The boy was still quiet, still healing, but Ray noticed small improvements each day. A little more eye contact, a little less tension in his small shoulders. On this particular morning, a weak spring sun had finally broken through the persistent rain clouds of the past week, casting a golden light over the countryside as Ray pulled his truck into the Miller's temporary driveway. Clay was in his usual spot on the steps, but today Mark sat beside him. The two of them engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Ray waited in the truck, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like an important moment between father and son. Through the windshield, he could see Mark place a gentle hand on Clay's shoulder, speaking earnestly. Clay nodded, then surprised Ray by leaning into his father's side, allowing himself to be gathered into a careful hug. The sight warmed something in Ray's chest. Whatever Mark had been saying, it seemed to be bridging the gap that had formed between them. A gap created first by grief and then widened by Vanessa's calculated interference. After a moment, Mark stood and waved to Ray, then guided Clay toward the truck. Ray rolled down his window as they approached. "Morning," he greeted them. "Morning, Ray," Mark replied, his expression somber but determined. "I just wanted to thank you again. For everything." Ray shook his head. No thanks needed. There is, Mark insisted. You saw what was happening when I couldn't. You gave Clay a way out. His voice dropped lower, meant for Ray's ears only. The prosecutor says Clay's journal is some of the strongest evidence they have. The way he documented everything. They say it shows remarkable presence of mind for a child his age. He's a smart kid, Ray agreed, glancing at Clay, who was climbing into the passenger seat of the truck. Gets that from both his parents. Mark's eyes glistened at the mention of Elena. Yeah, he does. He cleared his throat. Anyway, I wanted to let you know there's a hearing tomorrow. Vanessa's attorney is fighting the restraining order, claiming she has rights to visitation as Clay's stepmother. Ray frowned. After everything that's come to light? Her lawyer is claiming there's no definitive proof she caused the injuries, that Clay could be self-harming for attention. Mark's jaw tightened. It's exactly what she threatened that day at the station, using her resources to fight this. The prosecutor says she's hired one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state. Will Clay have to testify? Ray asked, concerned about the potential trauma of facing Vanessa in court. Not tomorrow. This is just a preliminary hearing about the restraining order. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to Clay's that it made Ray's heart ache. But eventually, yes, they're working to make the process as gentle as possible. Video testimony, a child advocate present. But he'll have to tell his story again. Ray nodded grimly. He's brave. He can do it. That's what I was telling him just now, Mark said, glancing at his son through the truck window. That his courage has already helped protect himself and potentially other children, and that I'll be right there with him through all of it. He lowered his voice further. The prosecutor thinks there might be other cases, other families. They're reaching out to authorities in Arizona and California, places where Vanessa lived before Oregon. The implications were chilling. How many children might have suffered at Vanessa's hands over the years? How many families had she targeted and destroyed? Ray pushed the disturbing thoughts aside, focusing instead on the boy waiting in his truck. One day at a time, he advised Mark. That's all any of us can do. Mark nodded, then leaned in to speak to Clay through the open window. Have a good day at school, buddy. I'll pick you up from Mr. Ray's house at 6. Okay? Uncle Thomas is making his famous lasagna tonight. Clay gave a small smile, the expression still tentative but genuine. Okay, Dad. As Ray drove toward Oak Ridge, Clay sat quietly beside him, gazing out at the passing landscape. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but Ray sensed there was something on the boy's mind. Everything okay? He asked gently. Clay was quiet for a moment longer before responding. Dad says I might have to talk to a judge someday. About Vanessa. That's right, Ray confirmed, seeing no point in sugarcoating the truth. The people who are trying to make sure Vanessa can't hurt any more kids will need to hear your story. What if she's there? Clay asked, a tremor in his voice betraying his fear. What if she looks at me the way she used to, right before she'd... He broke off, unable to complete the thought. Ray considered his response carefully. I won't lie to you, Clay. It might be scary to talk about what happened, especially with Vanessa there. But you'll have a lot of people supporting you. Your dad, the prosecutor, maybe even a special advocate whose only job is to make sure you feel safe. Will you be there? The question was so quiet Ray almost missed it. If you want me there, and if the court allows it, absolutely, Ray said without hesitation. Clay nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. After another moment of silence, he added, Dad cried this morning. Ray glanced over, surprised both by the statement and by Clay's matter-of-fact tone. Oh, yeah. He said he was sorry he didn't protect me better. That he got so lost in being sad about Mom that he didn't see what was happening. Clay picked at the frayed edge of his backpack strap. He said sometimes grown-ups make really big mistakes, but that doesn't mean they don't love their kids. Your dad's right about that, Ray said carefully. He loves you very much, Clay. What happened with Vanessa wasn't your fault, and it wasn't because your dad didn't care. I know, Clay replied, with a wisdom beyond his years. She tricked him, like she tried to trick everyone. He was quiet for a moment before adding, Mom would have seen through her, though. Mom always knew when people were being fake. Ray smiled slightly at this. Your mom sounds like she was a pretty smart lady. The smartest? Clay agreed, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. Then, after a brief hesitation, Mr. Ray, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you believe me? When I told you about Vanessa, some grown-ups don't believe kids about stuff like that. The question caught Ray off guard, though he realized it shouldn't have. Of course, Clay would wonder why his word had been taken seriously when so many children in similar situations weren't so fortunate. I believed you because you've never given me any reason not to, Ray said simply. I've known you since you were in kindergarten, Clay. You've always been honest and thoughtful. And the changes I saw in you, they weren't the kind of changes that come from nothing. He paused, considering how to explain the instinct that had driven him to pay attention in the first place. When I was in the Marines, we had to learn to notice when something wasn't right, even if we couldn't immediately see the danger. It's a feeling you get. And I had that feeling about what was happening with you. Clay absorbed this, nodding slowly. Like a superpower. Ray chuckled. Not exactly. More like experience. And caring enough to pay attention. As they approached Oak Ridge Elementary, Ray could see children streaming into the building, their colorful backpacks and lunchboxes bright against the red brick backdrop. Clay tensed slightly at the sight. Nervous about school? Ray asked. A little, Clay admitted. Some kids have been asking questions. About why I left on the bus with you that day. About why I'm staying at Uncle Thomas's house now. That's tough, Ray acknowledged. What have you been telling them? Clay shrugged. Just that there were some problems at home and it wasn't safe for me there for a while. Ms. Parker told the class that sometimes families go through hard times and need extra support, and that everyone deserves to feel safe. Ms. Parker sounds like a wise teacher, Ray observed, pulling into the drop-off lane. She is. She gave me a journal to keep at school, Clay said, a hint of enthusiasm entering his voice for the first time. Since my other one is evidence now. That was thoughtful of her, Ray said, putting the truck in park. How do you feel about writing in a new journal? Okay, I think. This one's different. It has space for drawing, too. And it has a lock. Clay's expression turned more solemn. No one's allowed to read it but me. Ms. Parker said that's a rule. A good rule, Ray agreed, his heart aching at the thought that this child had to learn such harsh lessons about privacy and trust at such a young age. Well, here we are. I'll see you after school. I'll be parked right where I always am. Clay nodded, gathering his backpack. But instead of immediately exiting the truck, he hesitated, then asked, Can I tell you something else? Something I haven't told Dad yet. Of course, Ray replied, turning to give the boy his full attention. Sometimes I feel bad that I didn't tell someone sooner, Clay confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe if I'd told Dad right away, or Miss Parker, or you, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad. The admission broke Ray's heart. Clay, listen to me, he said firmly but gently. What happened was not your fault. Not any of it. Vanessa was the adult and she chose to hurt you. She also told you that no one would believe you if you told. Right? Clay nodded, eyes downcast. That's what people like her do. They try to make sure their victims stay silent. The fact that you found the courage to speak up at all is remarkable. You're one of the bravest people I know. Clay looked up, surprise evident in his expression. Really? Really? Ray confirmed. And I've known some brave people in my time. Marines, firefighters, doctors who work in war zones. But what you did, trusting me with the truth when you were scared, standing up for yourself when an adult was hurting you, that takes a special kind of courage. A small smile tugged at Clay's lips. Thanks, Mr. Ray. After a moment's hesitation, he added, I'm glad you're my bus driver. And I'm glad you're on my route, Ray replied with a smile. As Clay climbed out of the truck and walked toward the school entrance, Ray watched him go with a mixture of concern and hope. The boy's shoulders were still too thin, his steps still cautious, but there was a straightness to his spine that hadn't been there before. The burden of secrecy had been lifted, even as new challenges lay ahead. Ray waited until Clay had disappeared into the building before putting his truck in gear and heading toward the bus depot to begin his regular route. As he drove, he thought about the upcoming hearing, about Vanessa's expensive lawyer and her determination to fight the charges. The road to justice would not be smooth or straight, but Ray was committed to seeing it through for Clay's sake, and for the sake of any other children who might have suffered or might still suffer at Vanessa's hands. Some battles were worth fighting, no matter how difficult, and sometimes the most important routes were the ones that deviated from the regular path. Friday's hearing at the Oak Ridge County Courthouse was scheduled for 10 a.m., requiring Ray to take a rare day off from his routes. Linda accompanied him, both to provide moral support and because her professional expertise as a pediatric nurse might prove useful if questions arose about Clay's physical condition. The modest courthouse, with its colonial architecture and imposing columns, was already bustling when they arrived. Mike met them in the lobby, his expression grave. Vanessa's lawyer filed a motion this morning arguing that the entire case is based on the unreliable testimony of a troubled child. He informed them quietly. They're claiming Clay has a history of seeking attention through elaborate stories, and that the physical evidence is either self-inflicted or the result of normal childhood activities. Ray felt his blood pressure rise. That's absurd. The medical examination clearly showed. I know, Mike interrupted, holding up a placating hand. The prosecutor is prepared for this line of attack. They have the nurse's detailed report, the photograph documentation, and of course, Clay's journal. But I wanted you to be prepared for what might be said in there. Linda's expression was troubled. They're going to try to destroy that child's credibility before he even testifies, aren't they? Standard defense strategy in cases like this, Mike confirmed grimly, especially when the accused has resources. Make it about the victim's reliability rather than the defendant's actions. The conversation halted as Mark Miller appeared at the courthouse entrance, accompanied by a sharp-looking woman in her 40s carrying a leather briefcase. Spotting Ray, Mark made his way over, the attorney following. Ray, Linda, good to see you, Mark greeted them, the strain of the past days evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. This is Diane Lawson, the prosecutor handling our case. Ms. Lawson shook their hands firmly. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, Detective Callahan. Thank you all for being here today. Mark has told me how instrumental you were in bringing this situation to light, Mr. Donovan. I just listened when Clay needed someone to hear him, Ray replied modestly. That's more than many adults do when a child is in trouble, the prosecutor observed. Your testimony about the changes you observed in Clay over time will be crucial when this goes to trial. She turned to Mark. Are you ready for this? She'll be in there with her attorney. Mark nodded, squaring his shoulders. I'm ready. For Clay. As they moved toward the courtroom, the main doors opened, and Vanessa Miller entered, flanked by an older man in an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Ray made in a month. The contrast between the Vanessa who had played the concerned stepmother at the police station and the woman who now strode confidently through the courthouse was striking. Gone was the carefully maintained mask of maternal concern, replaced by cool self-assurance. Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek bob, her makeup understated but flawless, her navy suit projecting professional competence rather than maternal warmth. She moved like someone accustomed to being in control, her gaze sweeping the lobby and briefly locking with Ray's before dismissing him with a slight curl of her lip. Richard Hargrove, Mike murmured, nodding toward Vanessa's attorney. Former prosecutor turned defense attorney. Specializes in high-profile cases. Charges about $500 an hour. Where is she getting that kind of money? Linda wondered aloud. That's one of the things we're looking into, Mike replied. Her finances don't match up with her claimed income as a real estate agent. There's something else there. Before they could speculate further, a bailiff appeared at the courtroom door, announcing that the hearing was about to begin. Ray, Linda, and Mike took seats in the gallery while Mark joined Ms. Lawson at the prosecution table. Vanessa and her attorney settled at the defense table, not acknowledging Mark's presence despite being separated by only a few feet. When Judge Eleanor Ramirez entered, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from tense anticipation to focused attention. In her late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, Judge Ramirez had a reputation for being fair but firm, particularly in cases involving children. We're here today regarding case number 0542-CR, the state versus Vanessa Miller, she began, reviewing the documents before her. This is a hearing to determine whether the temporary restraining order barring the defendant from contact with the minor child, Clay Miller, should be extended while criminal charges are pending. Ms. Lawson, you may begin. What followed was a methodical presentation of the evidence supporting the need for continued protection. The documented physical injuries, Clay's recorded statement, the journal entries detailing specific incidents of abuse, and Ray's observations of behavioral changes consistent with a child experiencing trauma. Ms. Lawson was thorough and precise, her arguments grounded in both legal precedent and common sense. Your Honor, the evidence clearly indicates that Clay Miller is at risk of further harm if the defendant is allowed any form of contact, supervised or otherwise. We ask that the restraining order be extended for the duration of the criminal proceedings. When it was the defense's turn, Richard Hargrove rose with the confident air of someone accustomed to commanding a courtroom. Your Honor, what we have here is a tragic situation. Not of abuse, but of a deeply troubled child manipulating the adults around him during a time of family transition. Ray felt his jaw clench as Hargrove proceeded to paint Clay as an emotionally disturbed child unable to accept his mother's death or his father's remarriage, spinning tales of abuse to regain his father's undivided attention. The physical evidence is ambiguous at best, Hargrove continued smoothly. Children at this age are prone to injuries from normal play. As for the alleged bruising patterns, we have expert witnesses prepared to testify that these could easily be self-inflicted, a phenomenon not uncommon in children seeking attention after traumatic loss. Beside Ray, Linda made a small sound of disbelief. Self-inflicted finger-shaped bruises on the upper arm? That's physiologically impossible, she whispered indignantly. Ray shared her outrage but kept his expression neutral, aware that any visible reaction could be used by the defense to claim bias. Hargrove continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. My client has only ever attempted to provide structure and guidance to a child floundering in grief. She has extensive experience with children through her volunteer work and has taken numerous parenting courses since marrying Mr. Miller. She deserves the opportunity to repair this relationship, not have it severed based on unsubstantiated accusations. The volunteer work claim caught Ray's attention. As far as he knew, Vanessa had shown no interest in community involvement since arriving in Oak Ridge. He made a mental note to mention this to Mike later. When Hargrove concluded, Judge Ramirez removed her reading glasses, studying both attorneys before speaking. I've reviewed the evidence presented, including the medical reports, the CPS assessment, and the minor child's journal. Her gaze shifted to Vanessa, who maintained an expression of wounded innocence. Mr. Hargrove, while I appreciate your client's position, I find the evidence of potential harm to the child compelling. Vanessa's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly, a flash of cold anger visible before she regained control. The temporary restraining order will remain in effect while criminal proceedings continue, Judge Ramirez declared. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full psychological evaluation of Mrs. Miller before any visitation can be considered, even in a supervised setting. She turned to Mark. Mr. Miller, the court recognizes your protective actions on behalf of your son. CPS will continue to monitor the situation with regular home visits, but Clay will remain in your custody provided you maintain separate residence from the defendant. The relief on Mark's face was palpable. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Ramirez nodded, then addressed the room at large. This case will proceed to grand jury indictment next week. Until then, the protective orders stand. Court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, Vanessa turned to whisper something to her attorney, her expression no longer maintaining even a pretense of maternal concern. When she stood to leave, she cast a cold, calculating look toward Mark and then, surprisingly, toward Ray. The message in that gaze was clear. This isn't over. Outside the courtroom, Mark approached Ray and Linda, genuine gratitude in his expression. Thank you both for being here. It means more than I can say. How's Clay doing? Linda asked gently. Better, I think. Having a routine helps. And he's been talking more. About his mom. About what happened with Vanessa. About his feelings. Mark ran a hand through his hair. His therapist says that's a good sign. That he's processing rather than suppressing. He's a resilient kid, Ray observed. He is, Mark agreed. Gets that from his mother. He glanced toward the courthouse exit where Vanessa was speaking with her attorney. I still can't believe I didn't see through her. That I brought someone like that into my son's life. Grief makes us vulnerable, Linda said compassionately. And people like Vanessa are skilled at exploiting vulnerability. What matters is that you're standing by Clay now. Mark nodded, his expression resolute. Always, no matter what it takes. He checked his watch. I should go. I promised Clay I'd pick him up from school today, take him for ice cream after his therapy session. As Mark departed, Mike joined Ray and Linda, his expression troubled. Hargrove was laying groundwork for their trial strategy. They're going to try to make this about Clay's mental state rather than Vanessa's actions. It won't work, Ray said firmly. Not with the evidence we have. I hope you're right, Mike replied. But Vanessa clearly has resources we haven't fully tracked yet. And connections. He lowered his voice. The prosecutor received a call yesterday from a state senator asking about the case. Subtle pressure to consider a plea deal with minimal consequences. Linda's eyes widened. How would Vanessa have that kind of political connection? That's what we're trying to figure out, Mike said grimly. There's more to her story than we know. And I have a feeling it gets darker the deeper we dig. As they walked toward the parking lot, Ray found himself reflecting on the hidden depths of human nature. How someone like Vanessa could present one face to the world while concealing such capacity for cruelty. But he also thought about courage, about how a 9-year-old boy had found the strength to speak truth when it would have been easier to remain silent. Whatever mysteries still surrounded Vanessa Miller and whatever challenges lay ahead in bringing her to justice, Ray knew one thing with certainty. Clay Miller would not face them alone. Not anymore. 1 year later, the morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn as Ray guided bus number 17 through the familiar streets of Oak Ridge. Maple and oak trees that lined the route had begun their annual transformation, splashes of gold and crimson appearing among the green. He hummed along to the oldies station playing softly on the radio, a sense of contentment settling over him as he completed his pre-route checks. So much had changed in the year since that rainy Tuesday when Clay Miller had refused to get off at his stop. Yet in many ways, life in Oak Ridge continued its steady rhythm. Children still boarded Ray's bus each morning with their oversized backpacks and lunchboxes. The crossing guard at Maple and Elm still gave her two-fingered salute, and Ray still knew each child by name, attuned to their moods and needs with the same careful attention that had once saved a boy from a silent nightmare. As Ray approached the corner of Sycamore Lane and Hillcrest Drive, a neighborhood on the opposite side of town from where Clay had once lived, he smiled at the sight of a familiar figure waiting beneath a large oak tree. Clay Miller stood taller now, his dark curls neatly trimmed, shoulders straight beneath a light jacket decorated with dinosaur patches. Beside him stood an older couple, Elizabeth and Howard Chapman, Elena's parents, who had moved back to Oak Ridge permanently to help raise their grandson. Ray pulled the bus to a stop and opened the doors with a hydraulic hiss. Morning, Clay. Mrs. Chapman, Mr. Chapman. Good morning, Ray, Elizabeth responded warmly, her silver-streaked dark hair and gentle smile so reminiscent of her late daughter that sometimes it caught Ray by surprise. Beautiful day, isn't it? That it is, Ray agreed. First day of fall activities after school today. Right, Clay? Clay nodded, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that had been absent for so long. Robotics club. Dad's picking me up after. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, a new one featuring characters from his latest favorite video game. Grandpa helped me build a prototype yesterday. It actually moves and everything. Impressive, Ray replied. Can't wait to hear how it goes. Howard Chapman, a retired engineering professor with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, placed a gentle hand on his grandson's shoulder. Remember, if it doesn't work exactly right the first time, that's how we learn. Clay finished with the air of someone reciting a familiar mantra. I know, Grandpa. The easy interaction between Clay and his grandparents warmed Ray's heart. When the Chapmans had moved back to Oak Ridge from Arizona 8 months ago, purchasing a comfortable ranch-style home with a backyard perfect for a growing boy, it had marked a turning point in Clay's recovery. The stability they provided, combined with Mark's ongoing commitment to healing their relationship, had created the secure foundation Clay needed to truly begin rebuilding his life. Have a good day, sweetheart, Elizabeth said, leaning down to kiss Clay's forehead, an affection he accepted without the self-consciousness many 10-year-olds might display. Remember, your dad's coming for dinner tonight. With Ms. Jenna? Clay asked, a hint of hopefulness in his voice. Elizabeth smiled. Yes, with Ms. Jenna. She's bringing that apple pie you liked so much last time. Clay's face brightened further before he bounded up the bus steps, calling a cheerful goodbye to his grandparents over his shoulder. Ray watched in the mirror as the boy made his way down the aisle, stopping to talk animatedly with another student about something involving the tablet they were sharing. As Ray pulled away from the stop, he marveled at the transformation in Clay over the past year. The quiet, fearful child who had once whispered devastating secrets had gradually reemerged as the bright, engaged boy he'd been before tragedy and abuse had altered his world. There were still moments, Ray knew, when shadows crossed Clay's face. Therapy sessions that left him subdued, nightmares that occasionally disrupted his sleep. But these instances had become increasingly rare as time passed and healing progressed. The legal proceedings against Vanessa Miller had concluded 4 months earlier with a conviction on multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. Despite her expensive legal team's efforts to undermine Clay's credibility and minimize the severity of her actions, the evidence had proven insurmountable. Clay's journal, with its heartbreaking detailed accounts of abuse, had been particularly damning when presented alongside the medical documentation and expert testimony. Most powerful, however, had been Clay's own testimony, delivered via closed-circuit television to spare him the trauma of facing Vanessa in the courtroom. Ray had been present that day, seated beside Mark as they watched the boy answer questions with a clarity and courage that left many in the courtroom, including the typically stoic Judge Ramirez, visibly moved. When asked why he had started documenting the abuse in his journal, Clay's response had been simple but devastating. My mom always said the truth was important, even when it's hard. I thought if I wrote everything down, someone would believe me eventually. Vanessa had been sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. More significantly, the investigation triggered by Clay's case had uncovered 2 previous victims, children from Vanessa's past who had suffered similar abuse, but whose allegations had been dismissed or concealed through legal maneuvering and the children's subsequent relocation. One of these cases was now being reopened, the statute of limitations extended due to new evidence. For Mark Miller, the year had been one of profound reckoning and rebuilding. The guilt of having failed to protect his son had initially threatened to consume him, driving him deeper into the self-isolation that had made Vanessa's manipulation possible. But with the support of therapy, and encouraged by Clay's own resilience, Mark had gradually found his way back, to himself, to his son, and eventually, to a place where new beginnings felt possible. 6 months ago, Mark had met Jenna Taylor, a grief counselor who ran support groups at the community center. Their relationship had developed slowly, with Mark approaching each step with careful consideration of its impact on Clay. Jenna, for her part, had shown remarkable patience and understanding, never attempting to replace Elena in either Mark's or Clay's life, but offering a different kind of warmth and support that complemented the family they were rebuilding. Ray's thoughts were interrupted as the bus approached Oak Ridge Elementary. The school looked much as it always had, though the playground equipment had received a fresh coat of paint over the summer, and a new mural, designed by the 5th grade class and featuring handprints from every student, now adorned the wall facing the drop-off area. As children gathered their belongings and filed toward the exit, Ray called out reminders and well wishes. Don't forget your lunchbox, Mia. Good luck on that spelling test, Cameron. See you this afternoon, everyone. Clay was among the last to disembark, pausing beside Ray's seat. Mr. Ray, is it still okay if I come over on Saturday? Mrs. Ray said she'd show me how to make those cookies for the bake sale. Absolutely, Ray confirmed with a smile. Linda's already bought all the ingredients. She's looking forward to it. The relationships between the Donovans and the Miller-Chapman family had deepened over the past year, evolving from the intensity of crisis into something warm and enduring. Weekend visits, shared holidays, and Linda's passionate adoption of the honorary grandmother role had created connections that enriched all their lives. Cool, Clay replied with genuine enthusiasm. See you after school. Ray watched as Clay joined the stream of students entering the building, exchanging greetings with classmates and a high five with Miss Parker, who stood at the entrance welcoming her students. The sight of Clay moving with such easy confidence among his peers, no longer isolated by secrets and fear, filled Ray with profound gratitude. As he closed the doors and prepared to continue his route to the middle school, Ray reflected on how a single decision, to drive past that bus stop and straight to the police station, had altered the trajectory of so many lives. Not just Clay's and Mark's, but his own as well. Later that afternoon, after completing his regular routes, Ray drove to the community center where he volunteered twice weekly with a program for at-risk youth. The initiative had been launched 6 months earlier, inspired in part by Clay's case, which had revealed gaps in how the community identified and supported children experiencing abuse or neglect. The modest gymnasium had been transformed with activity stations, and about 20 children between the ages of 8 and 14 were engaged in various projects, from art therapy to team-building exercises to simple recreational activities designed to build trust and communication skills. Ray moved among them, offering encouragement, mediating minor disputes, and simply being a steady, reliable adult presence. Many of these children had chaotic home lives or had experienced trauma that made trusting authority figures difficult. Ray's patient, non-judgmental approach often connected with kids who resisted other interventions. Mr. Donovan, called out Trey, a 12-year-old whose mother was currently incarcerated for drug-related offenses. Can you help me with this? Keeps falling apart. Ray joined the boy at a table where he was attempting to construct a model bridge as part of an engineering challenge. Let's see what we're working with here, he said, sitting beside Trey and examining the structure. Looks like you need more support at this junction. Maybe try reinforcing it like this. As they worked together, Ray noticed Mike Callahan enter the gymnasium, scanning the room until he spotted Ray. The detective made his way over, nodding greetings to several children he recognized from previous visits. Looking good, Trey, Mike commented, examining the bridge taking shape. Think it'll hold the test weight? Mr. Ray says it will if we reinforce these parts, Trey replied, his initial wariness of the police detective having diminished over weeks of consistent, positive interactions. Smart man, Mr. Ray, Mike said with a smile. Mind if I borrow him for a minute? Trey shrugged, already focused on implementing the suggested modifications. Just bring him back before weight testing. That's in 20 minutes. Ray followed Mike to a quieter corner of the gymnasium. Everything okay? Just thought you'd want to know. Mike began, keeping his voice low. We finally traced Vanessa's financial connections. Turns out she was being funded by her first husband, Dr. Lowell from Portland. Ray's brow furrowed in confusion. The one whose son she abused? Why would he be sending her money? Blackmail, Mike explained grimly. She had evidence, recordings, emails, suggesting he'd been negligent in his son's care even before she entered the picture. Nothing criminal, but potentially devastating to a pediatrician's career and reputation. She'd been extracting regular payments since their divorce. That explains the resources for her defense, Ray mused. And the political connections? Dr. Lowell's brother-in-law is the state senator who tried to pressure the prosecutor, Mike confirmed. We're still unraveling all the connections, but it looks like Vanessa had been building a network of leverage and protection for years. Ray shook his head, still amazed at the calculating nature of the woman who had so nearly destroyed Clay's life. Does Mark know? Not yet. I wanted to run it by you first, see if you think it would help or harm his recovery process. Mike had come to value Ray's insight into the Miller family dynamics over the past year. The prosecutor needs to inform him eventually since it relates to the case, but the timing is flexible. Ray considered this carefully. Mark is in a much better place now. More stable, more confident in his parenting. I think he can handle it, especially knowing that these connections can't protect Vanessa anymore. He paused, then added, "It might actually help. Knowing the extent of her manipulation could ease some of his lingering guilt about not seeing through her sooner." Mike nodded. "That's what I thought too. I'll have the prosecutor reach out to him next week." He glanced at his watch. "I've got to get back to the station. But Linda mentioned you're all having dinner this weekend?" "Saturday," Ray confirmed. "Clay's coming over early to bake with Linda, and Mark, his parents, and Jenna will join us for dinner. You and Sarah are welcome too, if you're free." "I'll check with Sarah, but I think we can make it," Mike replied with a smile. "It's good to see how far they've come. How far we've all come, really." As Mike departed, Ray returned to Trey and the bridge project, his thoughts lingering on his brother-in-law's last comment. The year had indeed brought profound changes, not just for Clay and Mark, but for the broader community as well. The revelation of what had happened in the Miller household had sparked important conversations throughout Oak Ridge about child welfare, the isolation that can follow grief, and the community's responsibility to its most vulnerable members. New protocols had been established at schools for identifying potential abuse, and the police department had expanded its specialized training for officers dealing with traumatized children. On a personal level, Ray had found a renewed sense of purpose. His role in Clay's case had reminded him of the profound impact one person could have simply by paying attention, by choosing to act rather than look away. The volunteer program at the community center had grown from that realization, a way to extend that same attentiveness to other children who might otherwise fall through the cracks. "Mr. Ray, look." Trey's excited voice pulled Ray back to the present. "I think it's going to work." Ray smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "Let's test it and see." Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the autumn sun casting long shadows across Ray and Linda's backyard as they prepared for their guests. Linda hummed softly as she arranged flowers on the patio table, while Ray checked the grill, ensuring everything was ready for the afternoon cookout. "Ray, can you bring in more flour from the pantry?" Linda called through the open kitchen window. "Clay will be here in 20 minutes, and I want everything ready for our baking marathon." Ray smiled at the excitement in his wife's voice. Linda had embraced her role in Clay's life with wholehearted enthusiasm, delighting in the opportunity to share her love of cooking and baking with a child who soaked up attention and affection like a sponge. Their relationship had flourished over the past months, giving Clay yet another stable, loving adult in his life and giving Linda the joy of being an honorary grandmother while their own daughter and grandchildren lived several states away. As Ray brought the requested flour into the kitchen, the doorbell rang. "That's early," he remarked, glancing at the clock. Linda wiped her hands on a towel. Maybe Mark dropped him off on the way to that meeting he mentioned. But when Ray opened the front door, he found both Mark and Clay standing on the porch, accompanied by an older couple he didn't recognize. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s and a woman about the same age with a kind face and stylish silver hair. "Ray," Mark greeted him with a warm handshake. "Hope you don't mind us arriving a bit early. There's someone I wanted you to meet." He gestured to the couple beside him. "This is Dr. James Lowell and his wife, Margaret, from Portland. Dr. Lowell, this is Raymond Donovan, the man I told you about." Ray's surprise must have shown on his face, as Dr. Lowell stepped forward with an extended hand and a somber expression. "Mr. Donovan, it's an honor to meet you. I've been hoping for this opportunity for some time." Still somewhat confused, Ray shook the offered hand. "Likewise, Dr. Lowell. Please, come in." As they entered the living room, Linda emerged from the kitchen, quickly reading the situation and smoothly shifting into hostess mode. "Welcome. I'm Linda Donovan. Can I offer anyone coffee or tea?" After introductions and polite acceptances of Linda's offer, Clay tugged at Ray's sleeve. "Can I show Ben my collection?" "He's in the car with Mrs. Lowell's sister." Ray glanced at Mark, who nodded encouragingly. "Ben is Dr. Lowell's son," he explained quietly. "He and Clay have been corresponding since the trial. They understand each other in ways no one else quite can." Understanding dawned as Ray connected the names to Mike's recent revelation. This was the first husband, the father of Vanessa's previous victim. Of course, Clay. Why don't you bring Ben in to meet everyone first? As Clay hurried outside, Mark turned to Ray. I should have called ahead to explain, but this was somewhat last minute. Dr. Lowell reached out after Detective Callahan contacted me about the financial investigation. He wanted to meet you in person, to thank you for doing what no one did for his son. Before Ray could respond, Clay returned, accompanied by a slender 13-year-old boy with serious eyes and a hesitant smile. This is Ben, Clay announced. He collects model airplanes too, but he builds the really complicated ones that actually fly. After a round of introductions, Linda suggested that the boys might want to see Clay's collection in the spare room, which had become something of a second home for Clay over the past months. As they departed, a momentary awkward silence fell over the adults. Dr. Lowell broke it first. Mr. Donovan, Ray, if I may, I'm not sure where to begin. When I learned about Clay's case, about what Vanessa had done to another child after Ben, I was devastated. Doesn't begin to cover it. The anguish in the man's voice was palpable. Margaret Lowell placed a supportive hand on her husband's arm as he continued. I believed her when she said Ben was making up stories about her. I was a grieving widower, overwhelmed by single parenthood, and she presented herself as the solution to all our problems. By the time I realized the truth, she'd already done terrible damage to my son. Ray nodded, understanding all too well the manipulation Vanessa had employed. Mark went through something very similar. Grief makes us vulnerable. Yes, but I'm a pediatrician, Dr. Lowell replied, self-recrimination evident in his voice. I should have recognized the signs in my own child. And worse, when I finally did confront her, I allowed her to negotiate a quiet divorce with a non-disclosure agreement. I was so focused on getting Ben away from her and into therapy that I didn't fight to have her held accountable legally. His expression crumpled slightly. I never imagined she would target another family, another child. James, you couldn't have known, Margaret said gently. You were protecting Ben the best way you knew how at the time. Dr. Lowell shook his head. I was protecting myself too, my reputation, my practice. My brother-in-law, the senator, advised handling it discreetly. The disgust in his voice made clear his current feelings about that advice. And then she used that very discretion against me, threatening to expose how I'd covered up the situation if I didn't continue to support her financially. Mark leaned forward. Dr. Lowell has been cooperating fully with the investigation. Ray. His testimony about the blackmail scheme has opened up new charges against Vanessa. When I heard about what happened to Clay, about how you recognized the signs and took action when no one else did, Dr. Lowell's voice broke slightly. I had to meet you, to thank you for having the courage I lacked. You saved that boy from years of the kind of trauma Ben endured. Ray felt a wave of empathy for the man across from him, recognizing the weight of guilt and regret he carried. Dr. Lowell, you made the best decisions you could with the information you had at the time. The important thing is that Ben is safe now, and you're supporting him in his healing. That's what Ben's therapist says, Margaret added with a small smile. He's made enormous progress in the past few years. Corresponding with Clay has been helpful for him too, knowing he's not alone in his experience. Linda, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. How did the boys connect? During the trial, Mark explained. When the Portland case was referenced in court, Dr. Lowell reached out to the prosecutor. He thought Ben's experience might help strengthen the case against Vanessa. When Ben learned about Clay, he wanted to write to him. They started as pen pals, but now they video chat regularly. It's been healing for both of them, Dr. Lowell added, and for us as families, knowing we're not alone in this journey. From down the hall came the sound of boyish laughter, a simple, joyful sound that seemed to lift something in all of them. Ray thought about the unlikely connections forged through shared trauma and recovery. How two boys separated by years and miles had found understanding in each other. How two families shattered by the same woman's cruelty were now supporting each other's healing. We came to Oak Ridge not just to meet you, Ray, but to tell you and Mark some news, Dr. Lowell continued. The prosecutor in Portland is reopening Ben's case based on the new evidence from Clay's trial and my testimony about the blackmail. Vanessa will face additional charges in Oregon, which will likely extend her sentence significantly. Mark's expression reflected a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a hint of the ongoing grief for what his son had endured. The prosecutor thinks it could add another 5 to 7 years to her sentence. She won't be able to hurt another child for a very long time, Dr. Lowell said firmly. And Ben has agreed to testify this time. He says if Clay could do it, so can he. The conversation continued as Linda served coffee and homemade muffins, the initial tension gradually giving way to the more ordinary exchanges of people getting to know one another. Ray learned that Margaret was a retired librarian, that Ben had inherited his father's interest in science but preferred engineering to medicine, and that the Lowells had a vacation home on the Oregon coast where they spent summers. Eventually, the boys reappeared, eager to show off the model airplane they had been examining together. Ben, initially shy, had warmed considerably in Clay's company, and Ray noticed how the older boy seemed protective of Clay in a subtle, understated way. "Mr. Ray," Clay asked excitedly, "can Ben come to the picnic too? He knows all about model rockets and said he could help us launch the one Grandpa and I built." Ray smiled at the expectant faces of both boys. "Of course he can. The more the merrier." As the morning progressed and more guests arrived, the Chapmans bringing side dishes, Mike and Sarah Callahan with dessert, Jenna Taylor with her warm smile and easy manner, the gathering took on the comfortable rhythm of a family celebration. The backyard filled with conversation and laughter, children and adults moving between groups, sharing stories and food. Ray found himself standing by the grill beside Mark, watching as Clay, Ben, and Mike's children collaborated on setting up the model rocket for its inaugural launch. Clay's face was animated as he explained something to the group, gesturing enthusiastically with the confidence of a child secure in his knowledge and his place among peers. "He's come so far," Mark observed softly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it, looking at him now compared to a year ago." Ray nodded, flipping a burger with practiced ease. "He's resilient, and he has good support." Mark was quiet for a moment before adding, "I never properly thanked you, Ray. Not really. For seeing what I couldn't see. For acting when it mattered most." "You've thanked me plenty," Ray assured him. "Besides, watching Clay heal, seeing you rebuild your life, that's thanks enough." "Still," Mark persisted, "I want you to know that what you did that day, driving to the police station instead of our house, it didn't just save Clay from more abuse. It saved both of us." His voice thickened with emotion. "It gave me my son back, and it gave me a chance to be the father he deserves." Ray placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, words momentarily unnecessary between them. Across the yard, Linda caught his eye, giving him a smile filled with love and understanding. Beside her, Elizabeth Chapman was arranging food on the picnic table, laughing at something Jenna had said. The easy camaraderie between Elena's mother and the woman now in Mark's life spoke volumes about the healing that had taken place in this extended family. "Dad, Mr. Ray, we're ready for the launch," Clay called, waving them over to where the rocket stood ready on its launch pad. A small crowd gathered in anticipation. As they joined the group, Howard Chapman handed Clay the launch controller with ceremonial gravity. "Would you like to do the honors, Captain?" Clay's face lit up as he accepted the controller, then looked up at Ben. "Want to help? We can do it together." The older boy smiled, placing his hand alongside Clay's on the launcher. "Ready when you are, co-captain." As the countdown began, voices young and old joining together, Ray felt a profound sense of rightness wash over him. This gathering of people, connected by both tragedy and recovery, represented something powerful. The capacity of human beings to rebuild from devastation, to forge new bonds from broken ones, to create family in its truest sense from the most unlikely circumstances. 3, 2, 1. Launch! The rocket shot skyward with a satisfying whoosh, eliciting cheers and applause as it arced gracefully against the autumn sky before deploying its parachute and floating gently back to Earth. Clay and Ben took off across the yard to retrieve it, their excited voices carrying back to the adults. "Perfect launch," Howard declared proudly. "Perfect day," Linda added, slipping her arm through Ray's. Ray nodded, watching as Clay and Ben returned triumphantly with the rocket, already planning their next launch with animated discussion. A year ago, he could not have imagined this scene. Could not have foreseen how his decision to listen to a frightened boy would ripple outward, creating waves of healing and connection that continued to spread. The bus route Ray had driven for 15 years had always been about safely transporting children from one place to another. But on that rainy Tuesday when he'd driven past Clay's stop and straight to the police station, the journey had become about something more profound, about courage, about truth, about the responsibility we all share to protect the most vulnerable among us. As Ray looked around at the gathering, at Clay's smile, at Mark's reclaimed confidence, at the unlikely friendship between two boys healing from similar wounds, he knew that sometimes the most important destinations weren't on any official route. Sometimes the most significant journeys were the ones that deviated from the expected path, leading instead toward truth, toward justice, toward healing. And sometimes the most profound acts of heroism came not in grand, dramatic moments, but in the simple decision to listen when a child whispered their truth, and to act on what you heard.